The mountain collapsed the moment Jack realized his daughter wasn't the only life hanging in the balance that day. Through sheets of rain and rivers of mud, he saw her, a stranger trapped in twisted metal, eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes when you know death is seconds away. Most men would have run. Jack had every reason to, but sometimes the measure of a man isn't found in what he has. It's found in what he's willing to sacrifice. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Jack Morrison gripped the steering wheel of his decade-old Honda Civic, knuckles white as he navigated the winding mountain road that connected Ridgemont Elementary to their small rental house 15 miles away. The windshield wipers worked frantically, squeaking against the glass in a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. In the rearview mirror, he could see his daughter Emma, 7 years old with her mother's eyes, clutching her backpack like a life preserver. "Daddy, I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "I know, sweetheart, we're almost home." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. They weren't almost home. They were barely halfway there, and the road was getting worse by the minute. Jack was 32 but felt 50. 2 years of single parenthood after his wife Sarah had walked out, not died, not taken by some tragedy, just walked out, had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. His construction job barely covered rent and groceries, let alone the mounting bills that seemed to multiply like weeds in an untended garden. His shirt was still damp from the morning shift, his hands calloused and raw from mixing concrete in the cold. But Emma was his world, his reason for waking up, his reason for everything. The mountain road twisted like a serpent, hugging cliffs that dropped into darkness on one side, while the rocky face loomed oppressively on the other. Jack had driven this route hundreds of times, but never in weather like this. The radio had been screaming warnings all afternoon, flash flood alerts, landslide risks, road closures. He should have left work early, should have picked Emma up before the worst hit, should have, could have, would have, the story of his life. "Dad!" Emma's scream pierced through his thoughts. Jack's eyes snapped up just in time to see the wall of mud and rock sliding across the road ahead. He slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing wildly on the slick asphalt. His arm shot out instinctively across Emma's chest as they skidded to a stop, the front bumper mere inches from the debris field. "It's okay. It's okay," Jack breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We're okay." But they weren't okay. He could see that immediately. The landslide had completely blocked the road ahead, a churning mass of mud, rocks, and uprooted trees that was still moving, still growing. Behind them, he heard the ominous crack of splitting earth. They were trapped between two disasters waiting to happen. "We need to turn around," Jack muttered, throwing the car into reverse. "We'll take the old highway, loop around through—" That's when he saw it. Through the curtain of rain, barely visible in the dying light of the afternoon, there was a vehicle. Not just any vehicle, a black luxury SUV, probably worth more than Jack made in 5 years, pinned beneath a massive pine tree that had been torn from the mountainside. The front end was crushed, accordion style, steam rising from the destroyed engine. And there, through the spiderweb-shattered driver's side window, was a face. A woman's face. Pale. Terrified. Alive. Jack's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Every instinct screamed at him to reverse, to get Emma to safety, to leave this nightmare in his rear-view mirror. The mountain was still moving. He could hear it, the deep earth-shaking rumble that meant more was coming. Seconds mattered, maybe less than seconds. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small, fragile. "What's wrong?" Jack looked at his daughter in the mirror, then back at the woman trapped in the SUV. She was trying to move. He could see that now. One hand pressed against the window, fingers splayed, reaching for something, anything. Her mouth was moving, forming words he couldn't hear but could understand with perfect, terrible clarity. "Help me." "Emma, baby, I need you to listen very carefully." Jack's voice was steady despite the chaos in his mind. He put the car in park and turned to face his daughter fully. "I need you to stay in this car. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. Do you understand?" Emma's eyes went wide. "You're leaving." "There's someone who needs help." Jack unbuckled his seatbelt, already knowing this was insane, already knowing he might be making the last mistake of his life. "I'll be right back, I promise." "You promise?" Emma's voice cracked, and Jack felt something shatter in his chest. She'd heard promises before. From her mother, who'd promised to come back and never did. From relatives who'd promised to help and disappeared. Promises were cheap currency in Emma's world, but not from him. Never from him. "I promise, Em. Have I ever broken a promise to you?" She shook her head, tears mixing with the fear in her eyes. "Then trust me. Stay here. Lock the doors." Jack pushed the car door open and was immediately assaulted by the storm. The rain wasn't falling, it was attacking, driven by wind that screamed through the mountain pass like a living thing. He was soaked to the bone within seconds, his work boots squelching in the mud as he ran toward the crushed SUV. The ground beneath his feet was unstable, shifting like something organic and malicious. Every step was a gamble. Behind him, he heard Emma lock the doors, the click barely audible over the roar of the storm. Ahead, the woman in the SUV had seen him. Her hand pressed harder against the glass, and he could see her mouth moving more frantically now. "Please, please, please." Jack reached the vehicle and immediately understood how bad it was. The pine tree that had crushed the front end was massive, at least 3 feet in diameter, and it had landed with such force that it had driven the entire engine block back into the cabin. The driver's door was jammed, bent inward at an angle that shouldn't be possible. Above them, he could see where the tree had been ripped from the mountainside, leaving a gaping wound in the earth that was hemorrhaging mud and rocks. More was coming. He could feel it in the vibrations beneath his feet, could see it in the way small stones were beginning to rain down around them. "Can you hear me?" Jack shouted, pressing his face close to the shattered window. Up close, he could see the woman more clearly. She was probably in her mid-30s, dressed in what had been an expensive business suit, now torn and stained with blood. Her face was cut in several places, glass embedded in her cheek, and her left arm was pinned beneath something he couldn't see. But her eyes, brilliant green even in the dim light, were focused on him with an intensity that was almost physical. "I can hear you," she called back, her voice muffled but clear enough. "Please, you have to get me out. There's more coming. I can hear it." "I know. I'm going to try the door. Can you move at all?" "My arm is stuck. Something's on it. I can't." Her voice broke, panic flooding in. "Please don't leave me here." "I'm not leaving." Jack grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. He braced his foot against the frame and pulled again, putting every ounce of strength his construction-hardened muscles could muster into the effort. The metal groaned but didn't budge. "It's not working!" the woman cried. Jack's mind raced. He looked around desperately, searching for something, anything he could use. His eyes landed on a fallen branch, thick and solid. Not ideal, but it might work as a lever. "Hold on!" he shouted, running to grab it. The branch was heavy, waterlogged, but he managed to drag it back to the SUV. He wedged one end into the gap between the door and the frame, then put all his weight on the other end. "When I say go, you push from your side, understand?" The woman nodded, positioning her free hand against the door's interior. "Go!" Jack threw his entire body weight onto the branch. The woman pushed. The metal screamed in protest, and for a horrible moment nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, something gave way. The door shifted an inch, then 2. Then, crack. The sound came from above them, sharp and final. Jack's head snapped up just in time to see another section of the mountainside beginning to collapse. A wall of mud and rock, easily 20 feet high, was sliding toward them like a wave of earth intent on swallowing everything in its path. "No time!" Jack abandoned the branch and grabbed the door with both hands. The edge was sharp, cutting into his palms, but he didn't care. Blood mixed with rain as he pulled with everything he had. "Push! Now!" the woman screamed, shoving against the door with her one free arm. Jack's muscles burned, his vision blurred with rain and effort, and for one terrible second he thought it wouldn't be enough. They were both going to die here, and Emma was going to watch it happen, and another promise would be broken, and the door gave way. It flew open so suddenly that Jack stumbled backward, nearly falling, but he recovered quickly, lunging forward to help the woman. Up close, he could see that her arm wasn't just pinned. It was trapped beneath the collapsed steering column, which had been driven back by the tree's impact, Her hand was at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. "This is going to hurt," Jack warned, already reaching for her arm. "I don't care," she gasped. "Just get me out." Jack gripped the steering column with both hands, ignoring the way the sharp edges bit into his already bleeding palms. He pulled upward, and the woman screamed as the pressure shifted. But it was moving. Inch by terrible inch, he was lifting it. "Pull your arm out, now!" The woman didn't hesitate. With a cry that was half pain, half desperation, she yanked her arm free. Jack saw the damage. Her wrist was definitely broken, bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. But there was no time to assess it further. The mountain was screaming now, the rumble so loud it drowned out even the thunder. Jack grabbed the woman around the waist and pulled her from the vehicle just as the first wave of mud hit the SUV's passenger side. The vehicle groaned, metal shrieking as it was pushed several feet across the road. "Run!" Jack shouted, but the woman's legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground. Without thinking, he swept her into his arms, ignoring her cry of pain as her broken wrist pressed against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was making him stronger. Either way, he ran. Behind them, the mountain was consuming everything. The SUV disappeared beneath the flowing mud, swallowed whole as if it had never existed. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Boulders the size of cars tumbled past, crushing everything in their path. The sound was apocalyptic, a roar that seemed to come from the earth's very core. Jack's legs pumped desperately, his boots fighting for purchase on the unstable ground. The woman clung to him, her good arm wrapped around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder. He could feel her shaking, shock, fear, pain, probably all three. 30 feet from his car, 25, 20. The ground beneath his feet lurched violently, and Jack went down, tucking his body around the woman's as they hit the mud. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but he didn't let go, couldn't let go. He rolled, trying to get his feet back under him when he heard Emma's voice cutting through the chaos. "Dad! Dad!" Jack's head snapped toward his car. Emma had unlocked the door and was climbing out, her small face a mask of terror. "No, Emma, stay in the car!" Jack screamed, but his daughter was beyond hearing. She was running toward him, her little legs churning through the mud, tears streaming down her face. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Jack saw another section of the mountain begin to give way, directly above where Emma was running. He saw the massive boulder beginning to tumble down. He saw his daughter's face, so full of love and fear that it physically hurt to look at. With strength he didn't know he possessed, Jack surged to his feet, still holding the injured woman. He ran toward Emma, closing the distance between them in seconds that felt like hours. The boulder was falling, picking up speed, and it was going to land exactly where his daughter would be in 3 more steps. Jack reached Emma and in one fluid motion swept her up with his free arm while simultaneously diving forward. The 3 of them, Jack, Emma, and the stranger, tumbled together across the muddy road, rolling until they slammed against the guardrail on the opposite side. The boulder hit the ground where they'd been standing, the impact so violent that Jack felt it in his bones. Smaller rocks and debris rained down around them, and for several horrible seconds, he was certain they were all going to die anyway. He curled his body around both Emma and the woman, making himself a shield, feeling stones pelt against his back like punishment. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The rumbling faded to a distant grumble. The rain continued, but the mountain had exhausted its rage, at least for the moment. Jack lay there, gasping for air, feeling Emma sobbing against his chest and the stranger's ragged breathing against his neck. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. "Daddy?" Emma hiccuped, her small hands clutching his soaked shirt. "I thought you were going to die. I thought—" "Shh, baby girl. It's okay. We're okay." Jack's voice was rough, scraped raw by fear and exertion. He loosened his grip slightly, enough to check both Emma and the woman for injuries. Emma seemed fine, just terrified. The woman's wrist was a disaster, and she had multiple cuts and bruises, but she was conscious and breathing. "Thank you," the woman whispered, and Jack realized she was crying. Silent tears mixed with the rain on her face, carving clean paths through the mud. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Jack didn't know what to say. He just held them both, the stranger and his daughter, while the storm continued to rage and the mountain settled around them like a sleeping giant. It was Emma who heard it first. "Dad, listen." Through the rain, barely audible, came the wail of sirens. Someone had called for help, probably from one of the houses further down the mountain. Emergency services were coming. "We need to move," Jack said, though his body protested the very idea. "Get closer to the road where they can see us." Slowly, carefully, he helped the woman to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and he kept his arm around her waist to steady her. With his other hand, he held Emma close. Together, the unlikely trio made their way to what remained of the clear road, putting distance between themselves and the devastation behind them. The woman leaned heavily against Jack, her strength clearly fading. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice weak. Jack Morrison. This is my daughter, Emma." "Catherine," the woman replied. "Catherine Sterling." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "You saved my life, Jack Morrison. You could have left me there. Should have left me there. You had every reason to keep driving, to protect your daughter, but you didn't. Why?" Jack looked down at Emma, who was watching him with those eyes that saw everything, understood everything. Then he looked back at Catherine. "Because someone needed help," he said simply, "and because I wanted my daughter to know that's what you do. You help. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Catherine stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. Before she could respond, the first emergency vehicle crested the hill, its lights painting the devastation in alternating red and blue. What happened next would blur in Jack's memory later. There were paramedics and firefighters, questions shouted over the rain, emergency blankets that did little against the cold, and the careful examination of their injuries. Jack's hands were bandaged, the deep cuts from the metal cleaned and wrapped. Emma was checked for shock and minor injuries, pronounced miraculously unharmed. Catherine's wrist was splinted, and the paramedics wanted to transport her immediately to the hospital, but she refused to get in the ambulance until she'd said something to Jack. "Wait," she called out, pulling against the paramedic trying to guide her toward the waiting vehicle. "Jack, please." He walked over, Emma's hand still firmly in his own. Up close, even battered and covered in mud, Catherine Sterling looked like someone important. There was something in the way she carried herself, the way even the paramedics seemed to defer to her slightly. "I need you to understand something," Catherine said, her green eyes intense despite her obvious exhaustion and pain. She reached into her jacket pocket with her good hand and pulled out a waterlogged business card. "This is who I am, where I work. I'm the CEO of Sterling Industries. Maybe you've heard of it?" Jack had, vaguely. Some tech company, he thought, big enough to be in the news sometimes. "I don't care who you are," Jack said honestly. "I'm just glad you're okay." Catherine laughed, but it was a sound tinged with something that might have been tears. "You should care, because you just saved the life of someone who has resources, Jack. Real resources, and I don't forget debts, especially not ones like this." "I don't want—" Jack started, but Catherine held up her good hand. "I know. You don't want anything. That's clear. That's why—" She paused, seeming to make some internal decision. "That's why I'm going to help you anyway. You and Emma both. I don't know how yet, but I will. That's a promise." The paramedics were getting insistent now, practically lifting Catherine toward the ambulance. But she kept her eyes locked on Jack's, willing him to understand, to believe. "I keep my promises too," she said, just before they loaded her into the vehicle. "Remember that." Then she was gone. The ambulance pulling away with lights flashing, leaving Jack and Emma standing in the rain with a handful of emergency personnel and a business card that was probably ruined anyway. "Is she a princess?" Emma asked, tugging on Jack's hand. Jack looked down at his daughter, then back at the departing ambulance. "I don't know what she is, Em, but I think we just met someone important." "You're important too, Daddy," Emma said with the simple conviction of a 7-year-old who knew her father was the best person in the world. Jack picked her up, holding her close despite his aching muscles and bandaged hands. "Thanks, sweetheart. Now, let's get you home and dry. We've had enough adventure for one day." But as a firefighter offered them a ride down the mountain and helped them into the warm cab of his truck, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the adventure was just beginning. Something had shifted in that moment when he'd pulled Catherine Sterling from her crushed vehicle. Some thread had been woven between their lives that couldn't be easily unraveled. He looked at the ruined business card in his hand, the ink bleeding away in the rain. Even though he couldn't read it anymore, he somehow knew he hadn't seen the last of Catherine Sterling. And deep in his gut, beneath the exhaustion and the fading adrenaline, Jack wondered if saving her life might have somehow changed his own. The truck pulled away from the disaster zone, carrying them toward home, toward safety, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the mountain continued to weep, the rain washing away the evidence of what had happened, but not the memory. Never the memory. Some moments define us, some choices reshape our entire existence. Jack Morrison had made his choice in the rain and the mud, with his daughter watching and a stranger dying, and now he would have to live with the consequences. He just had no idea how profound those consequences would be. Not yet. But he would learn soon enough. The hot water had run out after 10 minutes, but Jack stayed in the shower anyway, letting the cold stream wash the remaining mud from his hair while his bandaged hands throbbed with a pain that was almost welcome. It meant he was alive. It meant Emma was safe in the next room, probably already asleep despite her protests that she wasn't tired. It meant the day was over. Except it wasn't over. Not really. Jack turned off the water and stood dripping on the cracked tile floor of their tiny bathroom, staring at his reflection in the fogged mirror. A stranger looked back at him, face gaunt with exhaustion, eyes shadowed with something he couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or the residue of choices that felt too big for someone like him to have made. He should have driven away. Every rational part of his brain knew that. Emma was his responsibility, his priority, the only thing that mattered in this world. And yet he'd run toward danger instead of away from it, had gambled with the most precious thing in his life to save someone he didn't even know. Catherine Sterling, CEO. Someone important enough to have resources, whatever that meant. Jack dried off with a threadbare towel and pulled on the clean clothes he'd grabbed from his room. Faded jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days 5 years ago. His work clothes sat in a muddy heap in the corner, probably ruined. Great. That was another expense he couldn't afford. When he opened the bathroom door, steam billowing out behind him, he found Emma sitting cross-legged on the couch, very much not asleep. She was still in her school clothes, though she'd at least kicked off her muddy shoes. Her backpack sat beside her, and she was clutching Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat that went everywhere with her. "Emma, you should be in bed." "I can't sleep." Her voice was small, uncertain in a way that made Jack's chest ache. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the mountain falling. I see you under it." Jack sat down beside her, and Emma immediately curled into his side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful of his bandaged hands. "But I'm not under it. I'm right here." "You could have been." Emma's fingers twisted in Mr. Whisker's worn fur. "You could have died saving that lady. Then what would I do?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to dispel. Jack had asked himself the same thing 100 times since they'd gotten home. What would Emma have done if that boulder had found its mark? If the mountain had swallowed him whole? She had no other parent, no safety net, no one else in the world who'd fight for her the way he did. "I didn't die," Jack said finally. "We're both okay." "But you could have." Emma pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were too old, too knowing for 7 years. "Mom left because she said we weren't enough. If you died because you tried to save someone else, that would mean we weren't enough either. That I wasn't enough." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. "Emma, no, that's not—" He cupped her face gently with his bandaged hands, making her look at him. "Listen to me, sweetheart. What I did today had nothing to do with you not being enough. You're everything. You're the reason I wake up, the reason I work myself to the bone, the reason I keep going when everything feels impossible. Do you understand that? Then why'd you risk it? Why'd you go help her?" Jack was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would make sense to a 7-year-old, that would help her understand something he barely understood himself. "Because," he said slowly, "I want you to grow up knowing that we help people, even when it's scary, even when it costs us something. Because that's what makes us human, Em. That's what makes us good. And I need you to be good in this world, because it's going to be hard enough as it is." Emma considered this, her small face serious. "Is that why you always help Mrs. Chen carry her groceries? And why you fix Mr. Patterson's fence, even though he never paid you?" Yeah, baby, that's why. Even when we don't have money for new shoes? Jack winced. Emma's sneakers were too small, pinching her toes. He'd been saving up for new ones, but the car had needed repairs last month, and then there'd been the dentist bill, and the new shoes kept getting pushed further down the list of necessities they couldn't afford. Even then, he said quietly. Emma nodded slowly, then burrowed back into his side. The lady, Catherine, she seemed really nice, even though she was hurt and scared. She did, didn't she? She said she'd help us. Do you think she meant it? Jack thought about the intensity in Catherine Sterling's eyes, the way she'd clutched that business card like it was a lifeline she was throwing him. I don't know, Em. Rich people say things sometimes. They mean it in the moment, but then they go back to their lives and forget about people like us. Mom said things too, Emma whispered. She said she'd come back. And there it was, the wound that never quite healed, the ghost that haunted their little apartment with its broken promises and abandoned hopes. Sarah Morrison had walked out on a Tuesday morning, kissed Emma on the forehead, told her she'd see her after work, and never came back. No explanation, no forwarding address, just divorce papers delivered by a lawyer and silence where a mother used to be. Catherine's not your mom, Jack said firmly, and maybe she will help, maybe she won't. But either way, we're going to be okay. We've always been okay, right? Right, Emma echoed, but she didn't sound convinced. They sat together in the quiet of their small living room, listening to the rain that had finally softened to a gentle patter against the windows. The apartment was tiny, one bedroom that Emma had claimed, a pull-out couch for Jack, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a bathroom where everything leaked. But it was theirs. It was home. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, startling them both. He pulled it out and frowned at the unknown number glowing on the screen. Who is it? Emma asked. I don't know, Jack answered cautiously. Hello? Mr. Morrison? Jack Morrison? The voice was crisp, professional, female. Yes? My name is Diana Torres. I'm calling on behalf of Catherine Sterling. She wanted me to reach out to you this evening to make sure you and your daughter arrived home safely. Jack's eyebrows rose. We're fine. How did you get my number? Ms. Sterling is quite resourceful, Diana replied with what sounded like a smile in her voice. She also wanted me to inform you that she's been admitted to Mercy General for observation and surgery on her wrist tomorrow morning. She's asking if you might be willing to visit. She'd like to thank you properly. That's not necessary. I'm just glad she's okay. Nevertheless, she's quite insistent. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? Around 2 o'clock? Jack looked at Emma, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Tomorrow was Saturday. He didn't have work, and Emma didn't have school. They usually spent Saturdays at the park or the library, making the most of free entertainment. A trip to the hospital would eat up gas money, but I suppose we could stop by, Jack heard himself say. Wonderful. I'll let Miss Sterling know. She's in room 412. And Mr. Morrison? Diana's voice softened slightly. Thank you for what you did today. Catherine she's important to a lot of people. You gave her back to us. The line went dead before Jack could respond. We're going to see her? Emma asked, perking up. Looks like it. Jack set the phone down, feeling strange about the whole interaction. There was something surreal about it all. The CEO's assistant tracking down his number, the formal invitation to visit, the sense that he'd stepped into a world he didn't belong in and couldn't quite find his way back out of. Can I bring her something? Mrs. Chen says you should always bring something when you visit sick people. Jack smiled despite himself. What did you have in mind? Emma thought for a moment. I could draw her a picture of something happy so she doesn't think about the scary parts. That's a really good idea, sweetheart. Emma scrambled off the couch and ran to the kitchen table where her school supplies were scattered. Jack watched as she selected a fresh piece of paper and her box of crayons, then set to work with the intense focus that always amazed him. She might be only 7, but when Emma decided to do something, she did it with her whole heart. Jack's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marco, his foreman at the construction site. You okay, man? Heard about the landslide on Ridge Road. That's your route home, right? Jack texted back. Got caught in it, but we're fine. Tomorrow still on? The response came quickly. About that. Client push timeline up. Need everyone in Sunday too. Triple time for weekend work. You in? Jack stared at the message. Sunday was supposed to be his day with Emma. They had a routine. Pancakes in the morning, cartoons, maybe a trip to the dollar store if he had a few bucks to spare. It was sacred time, the kind of time that kept them glued together when everything else tried to pull them apart. But triple time. That was money he desperately needed. That was new shoes for Emma, maybe even enough left over to fix the leak in the bathroom ceiling that was getting worse every day. He looked over at Emma, bent over her drawing, tongue poking out in concentration. She'd understand. She always understood, even when she shouldn't have to. I'm in, Jack typed back. The reply was immediate. Good man, 6 a.m. start. Jack set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. The day's adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had doubled. His hands ached. His back ached. Everything ached. Daddy, look! Emma held up her drawing, beaming with pride. Jack took it carefully, mindful of his bandaged fingers. She'd drawn 3 figures, a tall one, a small one, and a medium one with yellow hair. They were standing under a rainbow, holding hands, with a big sun smiling down on them. At the bottom, in Emma's careful printing, it said, "Thank you for being brave. Love, Emma." It's perfect, Em. You think she'll like it? I think she'll love it. Jack felt something tight in his chest, loosen slightly. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever Catherine Sterling wanted or didn't want, at least Emma was okay. At least his daughter still believed in rainbows and smiling suns. Bedtime now, he said, standing up. For real this time. Emma didn't argue. She gathered up Mr. Whiskers and her drawing, then took Jack's hand as they walked to her bedroom. It was barely big enough for the twin bed and small dresser they'd gotten from Goodwill, but Emma had made it her own with drawings taped to the walls and a nightlight shaped like a star that cast gentle shadows across the ceiling. Jack tucked her in, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Sweet dreams, baby girl. Dad? Emma's voice was sleepy now, finally giving in to exhaustion. I'm glad you helped her. Even if it was scary, you're like a superhero. Jack kissed her forehead. Superheroes wear capes. I just wear old t-shirts. Superheroes are brave. You're the bravest person I know. The words settled over Jack like a weight and a gift at the same time. He wasn't brave. He was terrified every single day of failing Emma, of not being enough, of the 1,000 small disasters that could destroy their fragile life together. But if his daughter thought he was brave, maybe he could pretend to be, just a little longer. Sleep tight, Em. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, more than anything. Jack left the door cracked open the way Emma liked it and made his way to the living room. The pull-out couch was already extended from the night before. He never bothered putting it away anymore. He collapsed onto it, not even bothering to pull the covers up, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow he'd visit Catherine Sterling in the hospital. Tomorrow he'd say thank you for her concern, accept her gratitude, and then he'd go back to his life. Because people like her and people like him lived in different worlds, and a landslide might bring those worlds crashing together for a moment, but gravity always pulled them back apart. That's what Jack told himself as he finally drifted off to sleep, his bandaged hands resting on his chest, the sound of rain still pattering against the window. He had no idea how wrong he was. The next morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Jack woke to the smell of burning toast and found Emma in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the toaster, looking guilty. I wanted to make breakfast, she explained, pointing at the blackened bread. Like you do for me. Jack's heart squeezed. How about we make it together? They managed to produce scrambled eggs that were only slightly rubbery and toast that was mostly edible. They ate at their small table, Emma chattering about a dream she'd had where they lived in a castle and Mr. Whiskers could talk, while Jack tried to calculate how much gas it would take to get to Mercy General and back. At 1:30, they climbed into the Honda. The car protested starting, as it always did, but eventually the engine turned over. Jack had cleaned out the worst of the mud from yesterday, but the interior still smelled like wet earth and fear. The drive to Mercy General took 20 minutes through parts of town that got progressively nicer. The hospital itself was impressive, all glass and steel, the kind of place that probably charged $100 for an aspirin. Jack felt acutely aware of his appearance as they walked through the automatic doors into the gleaming lobby. His jeans were clean but faded, his jacket was fraying at the cuffs, and Emma's coat was a size too small. A woman in an expensive suit was waiting near the information desk. She spotted them immediately and approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Diana Torres. We spoke on the phone." Jack shook her hand, conscious of his bandages. "This is my daughter, Emma." "Hello, Emma." Diana crouched down to Emma's level. "I like your jacket. Is that a unicorn patch?" Emma nodded shyly, clutching her rolled-up drawing. "Ms. Sterling is expecting you. Follow me, please." Diana led them to the elevators and up to the 4th floor. The hallways were quiet, with thick carpet that muffled their footsteps. This wasn't the emergency ward. This was where people with excellent insurance stayed. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor. Diana knocked gently, then opened the door. "Catherine, your guests are here." The room was large and private, more like a hotel room than a hospital. Catherine Sterling sat propped up in bed, her left arm in a cast from fingers to elbow, her face still bearing the cuts and bruises from yesterday, but cleaned up and bandaged properly. She wore a hospital gown, but somehow made it look dignified. Her green eyes lit up when she saw them. "Jack, Emma, you came." Her voice was hoarse but warm. "We said we would," Jack replied, feeling awkward standing in the doorway. "Please come in. Diana, could you give us some privacy?" Diana nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Jack and Emma moved further into the room, and Emma immediately held out her drawing. "I made this for you," she said quietly, "so you'd feel better." Catherine took the drawing with her good hand, and Jack watched as her eyes scanned the crayon figures under their rainbow. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the composed exterior, a glimpse of genuine emotion. "This is beautiful, Emma. Thank you." Catherine's voice was thick. "I'm going to keep this forever." Emma beamed, the fear and shyness melting away. "Really? Really? In fact..." Catherine reached for the table beside her bed and pressed the call button. A nurse appeared within seconds. "Could you help me tape this to the wall, where I can see it?" The nurse smiled and found some medical tape, carefully securing Emma's drawing to the wall opposite the bed. "There," Catherine said. "Now I can look at it and remember that there are still people like you and your father in the world." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "We can't stay long. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm alive because of you." Catherine gestured to the chairs beside her bed. "Please sit. There are things I need to say." Reluctantly, Jack sat, and Emma climbed into the chair beside him, swinging her legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying them both. When she spoke, her words were measured, deliberate. "I spent all night thinking about what happened yesterday, about the choices you made. Do you know what most people would have done in your situation?" "Kept driving," Jack said, "like they should have." "Exactly, because it would have been the rational choice, the safe choice. You had your daughter with you, Jack, your daughter, and you still stopped. You still helped. Why?" Jack met her gaze. "I told you yesterday, because someone needed help." "That's not enough of an answer, not for what you risked." "Then I don't have a better one." Jack felt a flicker of irritation. "Look, Ms. Sterling, Catherine, I did what I did. You're alive. That's the end of it. We don't need..." He gestured vaguely at the expensive room, at her, at everything that represented a world he didn't belong to. "We don't need anything from you." "What if I need something from you?" The question caught Jack off guard. "What?" Catherine shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "I've built an empire, Jack. Sterling Industries is worth billions. I employ thousands of people. I make decisions every day that affect countless lives. And yesterday I was completely helpless, trapped in my car waiting to die, and I realized something." She paused, her eyes intense. "I realized that for all my power, all my success, I'd forgotten what really matters. I'd forgotten what it means to put someone else first, to sacrifice, to be genuinely good." "I'm sure you're a good person," Jack said, though he had no idea if it was true. "I'm an effective person." "That's not the same thing." Catherine looked at Emma, who was listening with rapt attention. When your father pulled me from that car, when he shielded both of us with his own body, he didn't do it for money or recognition or anything he could gain. He did it because it was right, because you were watching, and he wanted to teach you something about who he is, who you should be. Daddy's the best, Emma said simply. Catherine smiled. Yes, he is, and that's why I want to help you. Not out of obligation or debt, but because I've been given a second chance, and I want to use it to do something meaningful. We don't need charity, Jack said, his voice harder than he intended. It's not charity. It's investment. Catherine leaned forward slightly. Jack, what do you do for work? Construction. I'm a laborer. Do you like it? The question was so unexpected that Jack answered honestly. No, but it pays the bills, mostly. What would you do if you could do anything? Jack almost laughed. That's a kid's question. I'm 32 with a daughter to support. What I'd like to do doesn't matter. Humor me. Jack was quiet for a long moment, aware of Emma watching him, of Catherine's unwavering attention. I used to want to be an architect, he said finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. Before Emma, before everything, I had 2 years of college done, was working toward my degree. But then Sarah got pregnant, and we needed money, and I took the construction job to pay the bills until I could finish school. He shrugged. That was 8 years ago. What happened to college? Life happened. Sarah left. Emma needed me. The job became permanent. Dreams became something other people had. Catherine nodded slowly. What if you could finish your degree? What if you could become that architect? I can't afford... What if you could? Catherine insisted. What if money wasn't the obstacle? Jack stared at her, not understanding. Why would you care about that? Because yesterday you gave me my life back, and I want to give you your dreams back, both of you. Catherine looked at Emma. Emma, what do you want to be when you grow up? Emma thought seriously. A veterinarian, so I can help animals feel better. That's a wonderful goal. It takes a lot of school, though, college and veterinary school. That's expensive. Emma's face fell slightly. Daddy says we can't afford it. But maybe I could be something else. Jack felt like he'd been punched. He'd never said those exact words to Emma, but she'd absorbed the truth anyway, had learned to limit her dreams before they could break her heart. What if you didn't have to be something else? Catherine said gently. What if you could be exactly what you want to be? Miss Sterling, Catherine, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but we can't accept... Jack started, but Catherine held up her good hand. Let me finish, please. She took a breath. I want to offer you a position with Sterling Industries, not construction work. A real career. We have an architectural division that designs all our facilities. You'd start as an apprentice, work under our lead architects, and we'd pay for you to finish your degree. Night classes, online courses, whatever works for your schedule. Jack couldn't process what he was hearing. You don't even know if I'm any good. You worked construction for 8 years and kept a dream alive in your head. That's dedication. That's passion. We can teach skills, Jack. We can't teach heart. Catherine's voice was earnest now, almost pleading. And Emma, I want to set up an education fund for her. Full ride to whatever college she wants, graduate school included, veterinary school, medical school, law school, whatever she chooses. The room was spinning. Jack gripped the arms of his chair. That's too much. We can't... Why not? Because people don't just do things like that. Because there has to be a catch, some string attached, The only string is that you accept it. Catherine's eyes were bright with something that looked almost like tears. Jack, I'm going to be very honest with you. I almost died yesterday. I felt it coming, felt the certainty of it. And in what I thought were my last moments, my life didn't flash before my eyes. You know what I saw? Regret. Meetings I didn't need to take. Deals I shouldn't have made. People I'd stepped over on my way to the top. I saw a life that was successful, but not meaningful. She paused. And then you came. A stranger who had every reason to leave me there, and you didn't. You showed me that there's still goodness in this world, still people who do the right thing even when it costs them everything. That's worth more than any business deal I've ever made. Daddy? Emma's small voice cut through the tension. She was looking up at Jack with confused hope. Does this mean I can be a veterinarian? Jack looked at his daughter, at the possibility shining in her eyes, and felt something crack open in his chest. How many times had he lain awake at night, terrified of the day when Emma would ask for something he couldn't give her? College, opportunities, a future that wasn't limited by his bank account. And now here it was, being offered like a gift he didn't know how to accept. I need to think about this, Jack managed. Of course. Catherine nodded. But while you think, consider this. You taught your daughter yesterday that helping others matters, that being good matters. Now let someone help you. Let someone be good to you. Show Emma that the world can give back too. Jack was saved from responding by a knock on the door. Diana Torres poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the doctor is here for Catherine's consultation about tomorrow's surgery. Catherine grimaced. Already? She looked back at Jack and Emma. I have to deal with this, but please, think about what I said. Diana will give you my private number. Call me when you're ready to talk, or if you're never ready to talk. But please, don't say no just because it feels too good to be true. Jack stood, gently pulling Emma up with him. I hope the surgery goes well. Thank you. Catherine's eyes went to the drawing on the wall, to Emma's crayon rainbow and smiling sun. Thank you for everything. In the hallway, Diana pressed a business card into Jack's hand. This one crisp and dry, not like the ruined one from yesterday. Her personal number was written on the back in elegant script. She means it, you know, Diana said quietly. Every word. I've worked for Catherine for 5 years and I've never seen her like this. You changed something in her. I just pulled her out of a car, Jack replied, feeling overwhelmed. You did more than that. Diana smiled. But you'll figure that out eventually. The walk back to the car felt surreal. Emma chattered excitedly about being a veterinarian, about maybe having a dog someday if they had more money, about all the possibilities that had suddenly bloomed in her 7-year-old imagination. Jack just nodded, his mind spinning. He started the Honda, and it coughed to life on the 3rd try. As they pulled out of the hospital parking lot, Emma turned to him with serious eyes. Are you going to call her, Daddy? I don't know, baby. Why not? She wants to help us. Because... Jack struggled to put it into words. Because when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And I don't want you to get your hopes up just to have them broken. Like with Mom? Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yeah, like with Mom. Emma was quiet for a moment. But Catherine's not Mom. And she almost died. And you saved her. And now she wants to save us back. That's different, isn't it? Out of the mouths of babes. Jack glanced at his daughter, who somehow understood things he was still trying to figure out. Maybe it is, he admitted. So you'll think about it. Really think about it. I'll really think about it. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking out the window at a world that suddenly seemed full of possibility. Jack drove home through streets that looked the same, but felt different, carrying a business card in his pocket that weighed more than paper had any right to weigh, trying to figure out if he was brave enough to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the world gave back. He didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in years, he had hope that there might be one. Jack didn't sleep that night. He lay on the pull-out couch staring at the ceiling, Catherine's business card on the coffee table beside him, catching slivers of moonlight that made it seem to glow in the darkness. His bandaged hands rested on his chest, and every time he shifted position, the pain reminded him that yesterday had been real. The landslide, the rescue, the woman who wanted to change his life, all of it had actually happened. The problem was that Jack had learned not to trust good things. Good things had a way of turning into disappointments, of revealing themselves as mirages just when you got close enough to touch them. Sarah had been a good thing once, or so he'd thought. She'd smiled at him across a college classroom, and he'd believed in forever. That forever had lasted exactly 5 years before she'd walked out the door without looking back. Jack rolled onto his side, careful not to wake Emma in the next room. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen's television playing too loud, and somewhere above them, the Pattersons were arguing again. The same fights, the same volume, the same cycle that never seemed to break. This was his world, thin walls and broken promises and dreams that got smaller every year until they fit inside the cramped space of survival. But what if it didn't have to be? The question kept circling back, persistent as hunger. What if Catherine Sterling meant what she said? What if this wasn't a trick or a test or some rich person's momentary guilt that would evaporate once the painkillers wore off? What if Jack could actually finish his degree, become an architect, give Emma the kind of future he'd stopped letting himself imagine? His phone buzzed on the coffee table, making him jump. The screen showed 2:47 a.m. and a text from Marco. "Hey man, you awake?" Jack picked up the phone and typed back, "Yeah, can't sleep." "Me neither. Listen, about tomorrow, Sunday. You don't have to come in if you need rest. That was some serious shit you went through." Jack stared at the message. Triple time. That was rent money, grocery money, the buffer that kept them from drowning. But it was also his day with Emma, and maybe that mattered more than he'd been willing to admit. "I'll be there," Jack typed. "Need the money. You sure? We can manage without you." Could they? Jack knew the crew was already stretched thin, knew that Marco was asking because he was a good guy, not because they could actually afford to lose a body on site. And Jack needed that paycheck. He always needed that paycheck. "I'm sure. See you at 6. "All right. Get some sleep, man. You earned it." Jack set the phone down and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself thinking about the years he'd spent mixing concrete and hauling materials, watching architects on site with their blueprints and their vision, knowing he could do that job if someone had just given him the chance. He'd drawn up plans in his head while pouring foundations, had redesigned buildings in his imagination while his hands did the mindless work his body had learned to perform on autopilot. What did Catherine see when she looked at him? A hero? A project? Or maybe, just maybe, she saw what he'd stopped letting himself see: potential that hadn't died, just gone dormant, waiting for someone to water it back to life. The sun came up too fast, bleeding orange light through the thin curtains. Jack forced himself off the couch and into the shower, letting lukewarm water wash away the exhaustion he could feel in his bones. His hands were healing but still tender, the bandages needing to be changed. He unwrapped them carefully and studied the cuts that crisscrossed his palms, evidence of metal and desperation, of a choice that had cost him something but given him something too, though he still wasn't sure what. Emma was already awake when he emerged, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a serious expression that reminded him too much of himself. "You didn't sleep," she said. Not a question. "How do you know?" "I heard you moving around, and you've got the thinking face." The thinking face? The one where your eyebrows scrunch up and you look like you're trying to solve the world's hardest math problem. Emma took a bite of cereal. "Are you thinking about what Catherine said?" Jack poured himself coffee that was more necessity than pleasure. "Among other things, I think we should say yes." "It's not that simple, Em." "Why not?" Emma set down her spoon and looked at him with eyes that saw too much. "Is it because of Mom? Because you're scared someone else will promise stuff and then leave?" Jack felt like he'd been hit. How did she know? How could a 7-year-old possibly understand the geography of his fear that well? "Emma, I'm scared too," she continued, her voice small but steady. "I'm scared that if we say yes and it goes away, it'll hurt worse than if we just said no from the beginning. But Dad, what if it doesn't go away? What if it's real and we miss it because we were too scared to try?" Jack sat down across from her, this small person who'd somehow become wiser than he was. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned it from you. You were scared yesterday when you ran to help Catherine. I saw your face, but you did it anyway because it was right." Emma reached across the table and put her small hand over his bandaged one. "Maybe this is like that. Maybe it's scary, but right." Jack covered her hand with his other one, careful of the cuts. "You know I have to work today, right? Sunday shift." Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "Triple time. I know." "Mrs. Chen said she'd watch you." "Mrs. Chen smells like mothballs and makes me eat vegetables." Despite everything, Jack smiled. "Vegetables are good for you." "That's what she says too." Emma finished her cereal and carried the bowl to the sink, standing on her tiptoes to rinse it out. When you come home tonight, can we talk about it? About Catherine's offer? Really talk about it? Yeah, baby, we can really talk about it. Emma turned to look at him, water dripping from the bowl in her hands. Promise? That word again. The one that carried so much weight in their small family. The one that meant everything because Jack had never broken it. Not once. Not ever. I promise. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went to get dressed. Jack sat at the table finishing his coffee, feeling the weight of that promise settle over him like a coat that didn't quite fit, but might someday if he could figure out how to grow into it. At 5:30, Jack knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. The elderly woman answered in her bathrobe, her gray hair in curlers, but she smiled warmly when she saw Emma. Come in, sweet girl. We make dumplings today, yes? Emma brightened despite her earlier protests. Really? Really. My grandmother's recipe. Very special. Mrs. Chen looked at Jack. You go. Work hard. Emma is safe with me. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'll be back around 6 tonight. No rush. We have dumplings, we have movies, we have fun. Jack kissed Emma's forehead and headed out into the early morning cold. The construction site was 40 minutes away, across town in the new development that was slowly transforming farmland into cookie-cutter subdivisions. He arrived at 5:55, just as Marco was opening the equipment shed. You made it, Marco said, looking Jack over with concern. How are the hands? Fine. Ready to work. We're pouring the foundation for lots 12 and 13 today. You up for it? Pouring foundation was grueling work, mixing concrete, hauling it in wheelbarrows, spreading it smooth before it set. It would destroy Jack's healing hands, would leave him barely able to move by the end of the day. But it was triple time, and triple time meant options. I'm up for it. The crew assembled as the sun climbed higher. 8 men who'd all given up their Sunday for the same reason Jack had. They needed the money. They all needed the money, and that need bound them together in a way that conversation never could. The work was exactly as brutal as Jack expected. Within an hour, his hands were screaming protests through the bandages. By noon, blood had seeped through the gauze, turning the white fabric pink. Marco noticed and tried to pull Jack off the heavy work, but Jack waved him off. He'd committed to being here, and he'd see it through. During the lunch break, Jack sat in the shade of an unfinished house and stared at his phone. Catherine's business card was in his wallet, her private number memorized, though he hadn't consciously tried to learn it. His thumb hovered over the keypad, but he couldn't make himself dial. What would he even say? Thank you, but no? Yes, but I'm terrified? Help me understand why you're doing this? You gonna call someone or just stare at that thing? Danny, one of the other laborers, dropped down beside him with a grunt. He was older than Jack by a decade, with a wife and 3 kids and a resignation in his eyes that spoke of dreams long since abandoned. Just thinking. Dangerous pastime. Danny unwrapped a sandwich that had seen better days. You hear about Jenkins? What about him? Got laid off Friday. Client cut the budget and Jenkins was last hired. Got a new baby at home too. Danny shook his head. This businessman. One day you're making money, next day you're scrambling for unemployment. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. That could be him. One budget cut, one client decision, and he'd be back to scraping by on whatever odd jobs he could find, with Emma depending on an income that could vanish like morning fog. That's rough, Jack said. That's life. Danny took a bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly. You know what I'd do if I could do anything? I'd go back to school, finish my degree in education, become a teacher, but that ship sailed 15 years ago, and now I'm here until my body gives out, or they decide they don't need me anymore. Jack looked at Danny, really looked at him, and saw his own future written in the lines around the older man's eyes, in the way his shoulders curved inward like he was protecting himself from blows that never stopped coming. This was what happened when you gave up on dreams. You didn't die dramatically, you just faded slowly, year by year, until you couldn't remember what you'd wanted to be before survival became the only goal. What if you could go back? Jack heard himself ask. What if someone offered you that chance? Danny laughed, but it was a hollow sound. People like us don't get second chances, Jack. We get work and bills and the hope that we can keep our heads above water long enough to see our kids do better than we did. The rest of the day passed in a blur of concrete and pain. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Jack could barely grip the steering wheel of his car. His hands were a disaster, the bandages soaked through, and he knew he'd have to clean and redress the wounds before Emma saw them. The last thing he wanted was for her to worry more than she already did. He stopped at a gas station and bought new bandages with change he'd found in the cup holder, then spent 10 minutes in the bathroom cleaning his hands and wrapping them in fresh gauze. The cuts were angry and red, probably infected, definitely not healing the way they should be, but they'd heal eventually. They always did. Mrs. M. Chen's apartment smelled like ginger and soy sauce when Jack knocked at 6:15. Emma threw open the door, her face flushed with excitement. Daddy, we made 23 dumplings and I only broke 2, and Mrs. Chen says I'm a natural. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Jack looked past Emma to where Mrs. Chen was wiping down her kitchen counter. Thank you so much for watching her. Is no problem. She is good girl. Mrs. Chen handed Jack a plastic container. Dumplings for your dinner. You both eat. Get strong. You didn't have to. I know. I want to. Mrs. Chen patted his arm, and her eyes were knowing, seeing things Jack wished she couldn't see. You are a good man, Jack Morrison. You deserve good things. Don't forget that. Back in their apartment, Emma set the table while Jack tried to figure out how to open the dumpling container with his ruined hands. Emma noticed immediately. Dad, your hands are worse. They're fine. Just a long day. They're bleeding through the bandages. Emma's voice went high with worry. You should go to the doctor. Doctors cost money we don't have. They'll heal. But what if they don't? What if they get infected and you get sick and... Emma. Jack caught her shoulders gently. I'm okay. I promise. There was that word again, but this time Jack wasn't sure he could keep it. His hands were a mess, his body was exhausted, and the weight of everything, yesterday's rescue, Catherine's offer, the choice he still hadn't made, was crushing down on him like the landslide that had almost killed them both. They ate Mrs. Chen's dumplings in silence, Emma watching him with worried eyes while Jack tried to pretend everything was normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Normal had ended the moment he'd pulled over on that rain-soaked road and seen a stranger dying in twisted metal. After dinner, Emma cleared the table without being asked, then came back and stood in front of Jack with her arms crossed, a tiny, determined figure who looked so much like her mother, it hurt. We need to talk about Catherine, she announced. We do, Jack agreed. I've been thinking about it all day, while we made dumplings and watched movies and everything, and I think you're scared for the wrong reasons. Oh? Jack couldn't help but smile slightly. What are the right reasons to be scared? You should be scared that we'll say no and miss our chance, not that we'll say yes and it won't work out. Emma climbed into his lap, careful of his hands, and looked up at him with absolute conviction. What if this is the universe giving us something good because we were good first? What if you saved Catherine so she could save us? The universe doesn't work like that, baby. How do you know? Maybe it does, and you just never noticed because you were too busy being sad about Mom leaving and working too hard and trying to make everything okay all by yourself. Emma's voice softened. You're allowed to let someone help us, Dad. You're allowed to say yes to good things. Jack felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built to keep hope out because hope hurt too much when it died. What if I say yes and mess it up? What if I'm not smart enough anymore, or I can't do the work, or... Then you'll try anyway, because that's what you taught me. You try even when you're scared. Emma pressed her small hand against his cheek. Please, Daddy, can we just try? Jack looked at his daughter, this 7-year-old miracle who somehow understood life better than he did and felt the last of his resistance crumble. She was right. Danny was right. Even Mrs. Chen was right. He deserved good things, and more importantly, Emma deserved them. She deserved a father who wasn't too afraid to reach for possibility when it was offered with both hands. Okay, Jack whispered. Okay, we'll try. Emma's face lit up like sunrise. Really? You mean it? I mean it. Tomorrow. I'll call Catherine and tell her yes. Emma threw her arms around his neck, squeezing so tight Jack could barely breathe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank me when it works out, Jack said, but he was smiling, feeling something unfamiliar and fragile taking root in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement, Jack sat on the couch with Catherine's business card in his bandaged hands. The numbers seemed to swim in his tired vision, but he'd made a promise to Emma, and Jack Morrison kept his promises. Before he could talk himself out of it, he dialed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Jack? Catherine, I hope it's not too late to call. It's never too late. He could hear the smile in her voice and something else, anticipation, maybe, or relief. How did the surgery go? They pinned my wrist back together with what feels like half a hardware store. I'll be in this cast for 8 weeks, but they say I'll make a full recovery. She paused. Have you thought about my offer? Jack took a breath. I have, and I want to accept, if it's still on the table. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make Jack's heart sink. Then Catherine laughed, a sound full of genuine joy. Oh, Jack, you have no idea how much I was hoping you'd say that. I need you to understand something first. I'm not looking for charity. I'll work for this, whatever it takes. And if I can't cut it, if I'm not good enough, you're good enough, Catherine interrupted firmly. But I appreciate your honesty. This is how we'll structure it. You'll start as an apprentice architect in our design division on Monday. The salary is $60,000 a year to start, with benefits including full health insurance for you and Emma. Jack's breath caught. $60,000 was more than double what he made in construction, and that was with the overtime he regularly pulled. You'll work 40 hours a week, no more, no less, Catherine continued. I don't believe in burning people out. We'll enroll you in online classes at State University to finish your architecture degree. The company pays tuition, books, everything. It'll take about 2 years at the pace we're planning. After that, we'll reassess your position and salary. Catherine, I don't know what to say. Say you'll show up Monday morning at 8 a.m. Diana will email you all the details tonight. Where to go, who to meet with, dress code, all of it. And Jack? Her voice softened. Don't be nervous. You saved my life. Learning to design buildings is easy compared to that. What about Emma's education fund? Already set up. $500,000 in a trust that she can access for any accredited educational institution. Undergraduate, graduate, medical school, whatever she chooses. The only restriction is that it has to be used for education. Jack's vision blurred. $500,000. For Emma. For veterinary school, or medical school, or whatever dream she decided to chase. His little girl would never have to limit her possibilities the way he had. I don't know how to thank you, Jack managed. Thank me by being the architect I know you can be. Thank me by showing Emma that good things do happen. Thank me by living the life you deserve. Catherine paused. You gave me a second chance, Jack. Let me give you one too. After they hung up, Jack sat in the darkness of his small apartment, feeling the weight of possibility settle over him like a blanket. Tomorrow he'd have to give notice at the construction site. Tomorrow he'd have to tell Emma that her dream of veterinary school wasn't just a dream anymore. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, right now, Jack let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude for the choice he'd made on that rain-soaked road. Gratitude for the stranger who'd become something more. Gratitude for the daughter who'd pushed him to say yes when every instinct told him to run away. He looked at his bandaged hands and thought about what they'd done, what they'd lost, what they'd gained. These were the hands that had torn metal and shielded bodies and refused to let go when holding on seemed impossible. These were hands that had built things for other people's dreams, and now, finally, they'd get to build something for his own. Jack pulled out his phone and texted Marco. Need to talk to you tomorrow before shift. Something's come up. The response came quickly. Everything okay? Jack smiled at the phone, at the question that used to only have one answer. Yeah, he typed back. Everything's going to be okay. He went to Emma's room and stood in the doorway watching her sleep, Mr. Whiskers clutched in her arms, her face peaceful in a way that made his heart ache with love. This was why he'd done it. This was why he'd stopped. Not for gratitude or reward or any of the things that had come after, but for this small person who believed in rainbows and smiling suns and fathers who kept their promises. We're going to be okay, Em, Jack whispered into the darkness. I promise. And this time, He believed it. The night passed slowly, sleep coming in fits and starts as Jack's mind raced through everything that would happen in the coming days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw blueprints and buildings, lecture halls and possibilities that had seemed as distant as stars, but were suddenly close enough to touch. At some point near dawn, he must have fallen asleep because he woke to Emma shaking his shoulder, her face bright with morning light and excitement. "Dad, is it true? Did you really call her?" Jack blinked away the grogginess and smiled at his daughter. "I really called her. It's happening, Em. All of it." Emma launched herself at him, and Jack caught her despite the protest from his healing hands, holding her tight while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You're going to do great things here." Jack read the email 3 times, letting the reality of it sink in. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't going to evaporate when he blinked. This was real as the scars on his hands and the daughter in the next room who was singing off-key in celebration. At 9 a.m., Jack called Marco. "Hey, I need to give my notice. Today's my last day." There was a pause. "You serious? You get a better offer?" "Something like that. I'm sorry for the short notice, but don't apologize, man. If you got something better, you take it. Lord knows we could all use a break." Marco's voice was warm despite his words. "You're a good worker, Jack. Best of luck with whatever you're doing next." "Thanks, Marco, for everything." After he hung up, Jack felt the strangest sensation, like he was standing on the edge of something vast, looking out at a horizon that had been hidden behind walls of his own making. Fear was still there, crouching in the corners of his mind, whispering about failure and inadequacy and all the ways this could go wrong. But for the first time in years, hope was louder. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding Mr. Whiskers. "What happens now, Dad?" Jack smiled at her. "Now? Now we figure out how to be the people we always wanted to be." "I already know who I want to be, a veterinarian who helps animals." "Then that's who you'll be." Jack opened his arms, and Emma ran into them. "No limits anymore, Em. You dream as big as you want." "What about you? What's your big dream?" Jack thought about the question, about all the years he'd spent pushing dreams down until they fit in the cracks between survival and exhaustion. "I want to design buildings that make people feel something, places where families live and grow and make memories. I want to create spaces that matter." "You'll be amazing at that," Emma said with absolute conviction, "because you already know how to make spaces that matter. You did it here, with just us and this tiny apartment." Jack felt tears sting his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned it from you." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jack dug through his closet, looking for clothes that might work for an office job, realizing most of what he owned was stained with worksite dirt or had holes worn through from years of use. Emma insisted they go shopping, and though Jack protested about the expense, she reminded him that he had a new job starting Monday with a salary that meant they could afford things like dress pants that actually fit. At the department store, Emma helped Jack pick out 2 pairs of slacks, 3 button-down shirts, and a tie that wasn't too formal but wasn't too casual either. In the fitting room, Jack stared at his reflection and barely recognized himself. The man looking back looked professional, capable, like someone who belonged in an office designing buildings instead of pouring their foundations. "You look handsome, Dad," Emma said when he emerged, "like a real architect." "I'm not one yet, but you will be, and you look like you already are." They bought the clothes, and Jack tried not to wince at the total, reminding himself that this was an investment, that everything was different now. On the way home, they stopped at Emma's favorite ice cream shop, a rare treat that felt appropriate for a day when their entire world had shifted on its axis. Sitting at a small table with their cones dripping in the afternoon heat, Emma looked at Jack with serious eyes. "Are you still scared?" "Terrified," Jack admitted. "Me too, but it's the good kind of scared, the kind that means something important is happening." "When did you learn about good scared versus bad scared?" "Mrs. Chen told me. She said bad scared makes you small, but good scared makes you brave." Emma licked her ice cream thoughtfully. "I think we're being brave." "I think you're right." That night, Jack helped Emma pick out her outfit for school the next day, and she helped him lay out his new work clothes for Monday morning. They moved around their small apartment like choreographers planning a dance, each step deliberate and full of meaning. Before bed, Emma asked Jack to read her favorite story, the one about the little engine that could. It was a children's book she'd outgrown years ago, but tonight it felt appropriate. This tale of believing in yourself even when the hill looked too steep to climb. "I think I can. I think I can," Jack read, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "We know we can," Emma whispered, snuggling into her pillow. Jack kissed her forehead and stood to leave, but Emma's voice stopped him. "Dad, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for pushing me to be," Jack replied. "I love you, Emma. More than anything in this world. Love you too. Now go get some sleep. You've got a big day Monday." Jack returned to the living room and his pull-out couch, but instead of lying down, he sat at their small kitchen table with a notebook and pencil. His hands still ached, but he needed to do this, needed to remember what it felt like to create something from nothing. He started sketching, rough lines at first, then more detailed. A house took shape on the page, nothing fancy but solid and warm, with big windows that let in light and a porch where families could sit together in the evenings. It wasn't much, just a dream on paper. But it was his dream, and for the first time in 8 years, Jack let himself believe that dreams could become blueprints, could become reality. The sketch was still unfinished when exhaustion finally pulled him toward sleep, but Jack left it on the table where he'd see it in the morning, a reminder of who he used to be and who he was becoming. As he finally stretched out on the couch and closed his eyes, Jack's last thought wasn't about fear or failure or all the ways this could go wrong. Instead, he thought about Catherine Sterling's words. "You gave me a second chance. Let me give you one too, second chances." Maybe they were real. Maybe sometimes the universe did give back what it had taken, if you were brave enough to reach out and grab it with both hands, even when those hands were scarred and bandaged and trembling with uncertainty. Jack slept deeply that night, dreaming of buildings that reached toward the sky and daughters who became veterinarians and futures that looked nothing like the past that had tried to define him. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Jack stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., trying to knot his new tie for the 4th time. His bandaged hands made the simple task frustratingly complex, and the YouTube tutorial playing on his phone wasn't helping as much as he'd hoped. "Dad, you're going to be late if you keep doing that," Emma called from the kitchen, where she was eating cereal and packing her school bag. "I almost have it," Jack muttered, watching the tie slip through his fingers again. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, and sighed with the exasperation only a 7-year-old could muster. "Let me help. You know how to tie a tie? Mrs. Chen showed me on YouTube yesterday. She said you'd probably need help." Emma climbed onto the toilet seat to reach his collar and with surprising deftness created a perfect Windsor knot. "There. Now you look like a real architect." Jack stared at his reflection. The man looking back wore pressed slacks, a crisp blue shirt, and a tie that didn't hang crooked. His hair was combed, his face clean-shaven, and if he didn't look too closely at the uncertainty in his eyes, he almost believed he belonged in this new skin. "What if I'm not good enough?" The words escaped before Jack could stop them, this confession of fear to a child who shouldn't have to carry it. Emma's hands rested on his shoulders, her reflection meeting his in the mirror. "You pulled a person out of a crushed car while a mountain was falling on you. I think you can handle drawing buildings." Jack turned and hugged her, careful not to wrinkle his new shirt. "When did you become the parent?" "Someone has to be the smart one in this family." Emma grinned and hopped down from the toilet. "Now go. Mrs. Chen's taking me to school, and you need to get to Sterling Industries before you're late on your first day." The drive to Sterling Industries took Jack through parts of the city he rarely visited, where buildings were made of glass and steel instead of worn brick, where people walked with purpose in expensive suits, carrying briefcases and cups of coffee that probably cost more than Jack used to make in an hour. The company's headquarters was a sleek tower that seemed to touch the clouds, all modern architecture and intimidating grandeur. Jack's Honda looked embarrassingly out of place in the underground parking garage among the BMWs and Mercedes. He found a spot in the farthest corner, as if distance might somehow hide his car's age and rust spots, then sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, trying to calm the racing of his heart. This was it. The moment where he either proved he belonged or confirmed every fear that whispered he was nothing more than a construction worker playing dress-up. Diana Torres was waiting in the lobby when Jack entered, her smile warm and welcoming despite the corporate surroundings. "Jack, perfect timing. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Jack admitted. "Good. That means you care." Diana gestured toward the elevators. "Come on, I'll give you the tour and introduce you to the team. Catherine wanted to be here herself, but she's stuck in back-to-back meetings. She says to tell you good luck and that she's pulling for you." The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like ascending to another world. Diana kept up a steady stream of information, where the cafeteria was, how the badge system worked, what the dress code actually meant versus what HR said it meant. Jack tried to absorb it all, but his mind kept sticking on one thought. Catherine believed in him. That had to count for something. The architectural division occupied the entire 12th floor, an open concept space filled with drafting tables, computer stations, and windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Architects and designers moved between workstations, their conversations peppered with technical terms Jack half remembered from his college days. "This is your desk," Diana said, stopping at a station near the windows. It was equipped with a top-of-the-line computer, drafting software Jack had only heard about, and supplies that looked untouched and expensive. "Your supervisor is Michael Chen, no relation to your neighbor," I checked. "He's brilliant, a bit intense, but fair. He'll be your mentor as you learn the ropes." "When does he—" "Right now, actually." Diana nodded toward a man approaching them, probably in his early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of posture that suggested military background or exceptional discipline. "Jack Morrison?" Michael extended his hand and his grip was firm but not aggressive. "Michael Chen, welcome to the team." "Thank you for having me," Jack said, hyper-aware of how formal he sounded, how out of place he felt. "Diana's given you the basics?" When Jack nodded, Michael continued. "Good. Let's talk about what you'll actually be doing here. Catherine told me your background. 2 years of architecture school, nearly a decade in construction. That's actually a valuable combination. You understand how buildings go together in practice, not just theory." "I hope so." "We'll find out soon enough." Michael gestured for Jack to follow him to a conference room. "Your first project is modest by our standards, but it'll test your fundamentals. We're designing a community center for a nonprofit in the East District. Nothing fancy, but it needs to be functional, welcoming, and built on a tight budget. Sound manageable?" Jack thought about the sketches he'd done over the years in his head, the buildings he'd imagined while his hands did mindless work. "I'd like to try." "Good answer. Not yes with false confidence, but I'd like to try with honest uncertainty. I can work with that." Michael pulled up blueprints on a large monitor. "This is what the previous designer started before moving to another project. Basic structure, nothing inspired. I want you to look at it, really look at it, and tell me what's wrong. What would make this building better? What would make it matter?" Jack studied the blueprints, and slowly, his construction experience began speaking to him in ways his rusty architectural knowledge couldn't. The main entrance faces north. In this climate, that means anyone waiting to get in during winter will be hit with the worst wind. And the community room is too far from the kitchen. Makes no sense if they're hosting events. What else? No natural light in the children's area. Kids need sunlight, need to see outside. This would feel like a basement. Jack pointed to another section. And these support columns. They're going to create blind spots in the main hall. Dangerous if you've got kids running around. Michael was quiet for a moment, studying Jack with an intensity that made him wonder if he'd said something wrong. Then a slow smile spread across his supervisor's face. "You see it. The practical stuff, the human stuff. Half the architects here design beautiful buildings that don't work for the people who'll actually use them. You're thinking about the users first. Is that good?" "It's exactly what we need." Michael closed the blueprints and leaned back in his chair. "Here's how this works. You're going to redesign this community center from the ground up. I'll check in daily, guide you through the technical aspects, help you remember what you learned in school. But the vision? That's yours. Show me what you can do." Jack felt something ignite in his chest, a spark that had been dormant so long he'd forgotten it existed. "When do I start?" "Right now." Michael stood and opened the conference room door. Your desk has everything you need. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid ones, only expensive mistakes we make by not asking. And Jack? Michael paused at the doorway. Catherine doesn't make decisions lightly. If she believes in you, there's a reason. Now prove her right. The first hours at his new desk were overwhelming. The design software was more advanced than anything Jack had used in college, and his fingers fumbled over commands that should have been intuitive. Twice he nearly erased hours of work, saved only by a coworker named Rachel, who noticed his panic and calmly walked him through the recovery process. Everyone struggles at first, Rachel said, perching on the edge of his desk. She was in her late 20s, with purple-streaked hair and the kind of casual confidence Jack envied. I spent my first week accidentally creating buildings that defied physics. You're doing fine. I'm barely keeping up. Neither was I. Neither is anyone on their first day. Rachel glanced at his screen, where Jack had been attempting to sketch the basic outline of the community center. But that entrance repositioning, that's smart. Michael's gonna love it. By lunch, Jack had managed to create a rough floor plan that repositioned the entrance to face south, moved the community room adjacent to the kitchen, and added windows to the children's area that would flood it with natural light. It wasn't beautiful yet, wasn't refined, but it was functional in ways the original design hadn't been. Jack was so absorbed in adjusting the support columns when his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How's it going? Are you an architect yet?" He smiled and typed back, "Getting there. How's school?" "Boring. But I told everyone my dad is designing buildings now, and Miss Peterson said that's a noble profession." "What's noble mean?" "It means important and good." "Then she's right. Love you. Don't forget to eat lunch." Jack looked at the clock and realized it was past 1. He'd been so focused he'd forgotten about food entirely, forgotten about time, forgotten about everything except the building taking shape on his screen. When was the last time work had felt like this? Engaging instead of exhausting, creative instead of repetitive. The cafeteria on the 15th floor was nothing like the food trucks Jack was used to at construction sites. There were salad bars and hot meals, a sushi station and a grill, all subsidized by the company. Jack grabbed a sandwich and found a table by the windows, looking out over the city while his mind continued working through design problems. "Mind if I join you?" Jack looked up to see Catherine Sterling standing with a tray, her arm still in its cast but looking otherwise recovered. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Jack's car, but her smile was genuine, almost shy. "Of course." Jack gestured to the empty chair. Catherine sat down carefully, maneuvering her cast. "I've been in meetings all morning, or I would have come to see you earlier. How's it going? Is Michael treating you well?" "He's intense but good. Gave me a project to redesign." "The community center." Catherine picked at her salad with her good hand. "I may have suggested that one specifically. It's important work, Jack. That neighborhood needs something positive, something that shows people they matter." "That's what I'm trying to do. Make it matter." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, something complicated passing across her face. "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else?" Jack nodded, uncertain where this was going. "When I was trapped in that car, when I thought I was going to die, I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. I saw all the things I hadn't done, all the people I'd been too busy to help, all the projects I'd rejected because they weren't profitable enough, all the moments I'd chosen success over significance." Catherine's voice was quiet, almost confessional. "I built an empire, Jack, but I didn't build anything that mattered. Not really. Not the way your community center is going to matter. You help people. Your company employs thousands. I employ people so they can make me richer. That's not the same thing as helping them." Catherine set down her fork. "But you help because it's right. You stopped for me because someone needed you, not because there was something in it for you. That's what I want to remember, what I want to become. Someone who does things because they matter, not because they profit." Jack didn't know what to say. This powerful woman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions seemed almost fragile in this moment, as if the landslide had cracked something open inside her that money couldn't fix. "I think you're being too hard on yourself," Jack said finally. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally being honest." Catherine managed a small smile. "Thank you for saying yes, Jack, for trusting me. I know it wasn't easy." Emma pushed me, said I was being scared for the wrong reasons. Smart kid. Smarter than me, that's for sure. They finished lunch talking about lighter things, Emma's school, Catherine's physical therapy, the challenge of learning to write left-handed. But underneath the casual conversation, Jack felt the weight of what Catherine had shared. This glimpse into the hollowness that success could create when it wasn't built on foundation that mattered. The afternoon passed in a blur of design work. Michael checked in twice, offering suggestions that were actually helpful rather than condescending, praising the choices Jack made even as he gently corrected the technical errors. By 5 o'clock, Jack had a preliminary design that felt solid, a building that would serve its community rather than just occupy space. "Go home," Michael said, appearing at Jack's desk as other employees began packing up. "Day one is done. You did good work." "I could stay, refine some of the—" "Go home to your daughter. The building will still be here tomorrow." Michael's expression softened slightly. "This job requires passion, Jack, but it also requires balance. Don't lose yourself in the work. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way." Jack saved his files and shut down his computer, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. His hands ached from the unfamiliar keyboard work. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, but his mind was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Emma was waiting when Jack got home, practically vibrating with excitement. Mrs. Chen had let her in and was cooking something that smelled amazing in their small kitchen. "Dad, tell me everything!" Jack scooped her up, spinning her around the way he used to when she was smaller. "I designed a building today. Well, started designing one. A community center." "For real? Like people will actually use it?" "If we do it right, yeah." Emma squealed and hugged him tighter. "I told everyone you were an architect now. Was I right? Are you?" Jack thought about the question. Was he an architect? He had a job at an architectural firm, was designing a building, was being paid to do creative work. But more than that, he was doing what he'd always wanted to do, was using his mind in ways that felt right and true. "Yeah, Em, I think I am." Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen with a knowing smile. "I make celebration dinner, dumplings and noodles and vegetables you won't complain about, young lady." "I wasn't going to complain," Emma protested, though her grin suggested otherwise. They ate together, the three of them crowded around Jack's small table, and for the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel too small or too shabby. It felt like home, like possibility, like the beginning of something that could be beautiful if they were brave enough to build it. After Mrs. Chen left and Emma was in bed, Jack returned to the kitchen table with his notebook. The sketch he'd started days ago was still there, that simple house with the big windows and welcoming porch. But now he saw it differently. Saw the technical challenges and solutions, saw how to make the dream structural and sound. He started redrawing it, applying what he'd remembered and relearned today, and the house on the page began to look less like fantasy and more like something that could exist in the real world. His phone buzzed with an email from Michael. "Preliminary design looks strong. Tomorrow we'll work on structural calculations and building codes. Get some rest." Jack smiled at the message, at this new reality where he had a supervisor who respected him, colleagues who helped him, work that engaged his mind and soul. He responded with a simple thank you and closed his laptop. The week that followed was intense but rewarding. Jack arrived early each morning, his tie now something Emma helped him with while they ate breakfast together, a ritual they'd developed. He spent his days learning and relearning, making mistakes and fixing them, slowly building confidence alongside the community center that was taking shape in his designs. Michael was a patient teacher, explaining building codes Jack had forgotten and structural principles he'd never learned properly. Rachel became a friend, sharing shortcuts and laughing when Jack accidentally created impossible angles or forgot to account for gravity. The other architects welcomed him gradually, recognizing that his practical construction knowledge made him valuable even as he struggled with the theoretical aspects. On Thursday, Catherine stopped by his desk with her assistant Diana trailing behind. "How's our community center coming along?" Jack pulled up his latest design on the screen. "The main structure is solid. I've added covered outdoor spaces for events, maximized natural light, and created separate zones for different age groups while keeping sightlines open for supervision." Catherine studied the screen, her good hand tracing the lines of his design. Jack, this is beautiful. And I don't mean aesthetically, though it is. I mean it's beautiful in purpose. You've created something that will actually serve people. That was the goal. Can I show you something? Catherine gestured for Jack to follow her to the conference room. Once inside with the door closed, she pulled up another set of blueprints on the monitor. This is a project we're bidding on, a mixed-income housing development. The current design is efficient but soulless. What do you see? Jack studied the plans, his construction experience and developing architectural eye working together. It's too uniform, makes it obvious which units are subsidized and which are market rate, creates division before people even move in. Exactly what I thought. What would you do differently? Vary the facades, mix the unit types throughout the building, make it impossible to tell from the outside who's paying what. Add shared spaces that encourage interaction, community gardens, playgrounds, common rooms. Make it feel like a neighborhood, not a project. Catherine was smiling now, that same expression she'd worn in the hospital when Emma gave her the drawing. I want you on this project, not as an apprentice, as a junior architect. Jack's heart stuttered. Catherine, I've been here less than a week. I don't have my degree yet. I'm still learning the software. You have something more important than any of that. You understand what it means to struggle, to need affordable housing, to want dignity along with a roof over your head. Catherine leaned against the conference table. The lead architect is Thomas Wellington. He's brilliant with structure but terrible with human elements. You'd balance him out. And Michael says you're ready for more responsibility. He said that? He said you're raw but talented, practical but creative. He said you see buildings the way they should be seen, as spaces for people, not just problems to solve. Catherine's eyes were intense. This is a big opportunity, Jack. Bigger than the community center. Are you ready for it? Jack thought about Emma, about the promise he'd made to try, to be brave even when fear screamed at him to play it safe. I'd like to try. Same answer as your first day. I'm starting to think that's your superpower, honest uncertainty instead of false confidence. Catherine extended her good hand. Welcome to the Wellington Project. We pitch in 3 weeks. Think you can have ideas ready by then? Jack shook her hand, feeling the weight of trust she was placing in him. I'll have something ready. That evening, Jack came home to find Emma and Mrs. Chen making cookies, the apartment filled with the smell of chocolate chips and sugar. Emma's hands were covered in flour, and she had a smudge of dough on her cheek that made her look younger than 7. Dad, you're late! We saved you cookie dough to taste! Emma rushed over, forgetting about her floury hands until she'd already grabbed his shirt. Jack laughed and hugged her anyway, flour and all. Sorry, got caught up at work. But I have news. I got assigned to a bigger project. Bigger than the community center? Much bigger. Apartment buildings for families who need affordable places to live. Emma's eyes went wide. Like us? Like we used to need? Exactly like us. Mrs. Chen handed Jack a warm cookie from the first batch. You help people now, like you always do, but bigger. Is good, Jack, is very good. Jack bit into the cookie and thought about what Mrs. Chen said. He was helping people, but not the way he'd helped Catherine. Not with his hands and immediate action, but with his mind and vision and understanding of what people needed when they came home at night. Different kind of help, maybe even more lasting. Emma climbed onto his lap, still covered in flour, but not caring. Are you happy, Dad? Like really happy? Jack considered the question. Was he happy? The work was challenging, sometimes overwhelming. He still struggled with the software, still felt like an imposter when he sat in meetings with architects who had decades of experience. But underneath the stress and uncertainty was something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Meaning. The sense that what he did each day mattered beyond a paycheck. Yeah, Em, I think I am. Good. Because you deserve to be happy. Mrs. Chen says so, and she's always right. Mrs. Chen is very wise, Jack agreed, making the elderly woman blush. They spent the evening eating too many cookies and watching Emma's favorite movie, the one about the girl who built a robot to save her town. Jack had seen it dozens of times, but tonight he noticed something new. The way the girl didn't let anyone tell her what was impossible. The the way she built her dream piece by piece, even when everyone said it couldn't be done. After Emma was asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and started sketching ideas for the housing development. He thought about all the apartments he'd lived in over the years, the ones with thin walls and broken heating and landlords who didn't care. He thought about what he'd wanted those places to be, what would have made them feel like homes instead of just spaces to survive. His pencil moved across the page, creating buildings that were beautiful but practical, that had community spaces and green areas and places where kids could play safely. He designed units with good natural light, with layouts that made small spaces feel larger, with details that showed residents they were valued. It was past midnight when Jack finally stopped sketching, his hands cramping but his mind still racing with ideas. He took photos of his drawings with his phone and emailed them to himself so he could refine them tomorrow using the proper software. As he settled onto the pull-out couch, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Heard you're working late. Don't burn yourself out. The buildings will still be there tomorrow. Take care of yourself and Emma. That's an order from the boss." Jack smiled and typed back, "Yes, ma'am. See you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Catherine replied, "when you'll continue to amaze us all." The next 2 weeks blurred together in a rush of work and learning. Jack's community center design was approved by Michael and sent to the nonprofit, who responded with enthusiasm that made Jack's chest swell with pride. The Wellington Housing Project consumed most of his time, Thomas Wellington turning out to be exactly as Catherine described, brilliant but cold, capable of creating structurally perfect buildings that had no soul. "This is efficient," Thomas said during one of their first meetings, gesturing at Jack's sketches. "But efficiency isn't always profitable. These community spaces take up square footage we could rent. But they create value in other ways," Jack argued, finding courage he didn't know he had. "Families stay longer in buildings where they feel connected to their neighbors. Lower turnover means lower costs long term." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You've been here 2 weeks and you're lecturing me on long-term value? I'm offering perspective from someone who's lived in these buildings, who knows what makes them homes versus warehouses for people." The room went quiet, other architects exchanging glances. Jack wondered if he'd gone too far, if his inexperience had made him too bold. Then Thomas smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Fair point. Keep the community spaces, but make them multifunctional. I want every square foot earning its keep." Jack worked with Thomas's parameters, creating spaces that could be community rooms or event spaces or workout areas that served multiple purposes and justified their existence in balance sheets as well as human terms. It was a compromise, but one that felt right. On Friday of his 3rd week, Diana appeared at Jack's desk with an envelope. "This is from Catherine. She wanted you to have it before the weekend." Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Jack, enclosed is your first paycheck. More than a salary, it represents what you've earned through talent and dedication. You belong here. Never doubt that. Also, Emma's education fund is officially active. The paperwork is complete. Her future is secure. Yours is too. Believe it. Catherine." Jack stared at the paycheck, at the number that was more than he'd ever made in a month, more than he'd thought possible 3 weeks ago. This was real. All of it was real. And it wasn't luck or charity. It was earned, built on choices he'd made and work he'd done and potential he'd finally been allowed to develop. He texted Emma, "Pizza tonight? The good place with the arcade?" Her response was immediate. "Really? Yes, yes, yes. Really, we're celebrating." That night, watching Emma win tickets at the arcade and eat pizza without worrying about the cost, Jack felt something settle in his chest. Not just happiness, though there was that. Something deeper, peace maybe, or the knowledge that he'd made the right choice when he'd said yes to possibility. Emma was laughing, her face flushed with joy, and Jack realized this was what he'd been working toward all along. Not just survival, but this. Moments of pure, uncomplicated happiness. The ability to say yes to his daughter without calculating costs. The space to breathe without fear crushing his lungs. "Dad, come play!" Emma called, waving at him from a racing game. Jack joined her, and they competed against each other with fierce determination, Emma winning by a mile because Jack kept getting distracted by her laughter, by the sound of joy he'd give anything to hear forever. Later, driving home with Emma asleep in the back seat and a bag of arcade prizes beside her, Jack thought about the moment on that rain-soaked road when he'd made a choice that had seemed impossible. He'd chosen to help, to risk everything, to believe that doing the right thing mattered even when it was terrified. That choice had led to this: his daughter asleep with a smile on her face, a career that fulfilled him, a future that wasn't defined by limitations. And somewhere in a hospital room that night, Catherine Sterling had received a second chance at life that she was using to give second chances to others. Jack pulled into their apartment complex and carefully carried Emma upstairs, tucking her into bed with Mr. Whiskers and the stuffed dragon she'd won at the arcade. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams, baby girl, dream big." Because now, finally, they could afford to. 3 months had passed since that rain-soaked afternoon when Jack's life had changed forever, and he still sometimes woke up expecting it all to be a dream. But then he'd see Emma sleeping peacefully in her own room, wearing pajamas that actually fit, and he'd remember that this was real. The scars on his hands had faded to thin white lines, permanent reminders of the day he'd chosen courage over caution. The morning of the Wellington Project presentation arrived with unseasonable warmth for January. Jack stood in front of his bathroom mirror, this time tying his own tie with practiced efficiency, and marveled at how much had changed. The man looking back at him had filled out slightly, no longer carrying the gaunt look of someone who skipped meals to make sure his daughter ate. His eyes were clearer, less shadowed by exhaustion and fear. He looked like someone who belonged in the world he now inhabited. "Dad, your portfolio is on the table," Emma called from the kitchen. "And I made you toast, only slightly burned." Jack smiled and emerged to find Emma already dressed for school, her new backpack packed and ready. She'd grown in these 3 months too, not just physically, but in confidence. The scared little girl who'd watched her father struggle had transformed into someone who believed good things were possible because she'd seen them happen. "Thank you, sweetheart." Jack took the toast and his portfolio, the leather case Catherine had given him last month. Inside were the finalized plans for the Wellington Project, buildings Jack had poured his soul into, designs that balanced Thomas's efficiency with his own understanding of what people needed. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked, studying him with those two perceptive eyes. "Terrified," Jack admitted, because he'd learned not to lie to his daughter about fear. "This is the biggest presentation I've ever done. If we get this contract, it means building something real, something that will last. You'll be amazing. You always are." Emma hugged him fiercely. "And tonight, no matter what happens, we'll celebrate. Because you've already won, Dad. You're doing what you love." Jack held her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." Emma pulled back and grinned. "Now go. Mrs. Chen is walking me to school, and you've got buildings to sell." The drive to Sterling Industries felt different today. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel, his breathing calm despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m., and the clients, a coalition of affordable housing advocates and city officials, would be there to evaluate whether Sterling Industries understood their vision. Michael was waiting at Jack's desk when he arrived, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Wellington's already in the conference room practicing his opening remarks. "Man treats every presentation like a TED Talk. Is that bad?" "Depends if you like watching paint dry." Michael handed Jack the coffee. "But here's the thing. Thomas handles the technical brilliance. You handle the heart. Together you're unstoppable. Just don't let him dominate the room. The clients need to hear your perspective." "Thomas has been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing it for 3 months. And you've lived the struggle these buildings are meant to address. That's worth more than 20 years of theory." Michael squeezed Jack's shoulder. "Catherine handpicked you for this. Trust that she saw something worth believing in." The conference room was already filling when Jack entered. Thomas Wellington stood at the head of the table, impeccably dressed and reviewing notes on his tablet. Rachel was setting up the visual presentation, and several other team members were arranging portfolios and materials. And there, near the window, was Catherine. She looked every inch the CEO today, her arm finally free of the cast, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than Jack's first car. But when she saw him, Her expression softened into something warmer, more personal. "Jack, good morning. Ready to change some lives today?" "Ready to try," Jack replied, and Catherine laughed. "That's becoming your signature answer. I like it, honest without being defeatist." She gestured to the portfolios on the table. "I looked at your final designs last night. They're extraordinary. You've created something that will actually matter to people." Thomas deserves most of the credit. Thomas created structurally sound buildings. You created homes. Catherine's voice dropped lower, meant only for Jack. Don't minimize what you've done. Don't minimize who you've become. The clients arrived at precisely 10 a.m., a group of 7 people representing different housing advocacy organizations and city departments. They looked tired, Jack thought, like people who'd spent years fighting for scraps and learning to expect disappointment. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not so long ago. Thomas opened the presentation with his usual technical brilliance, walking through structural specifications and cost projections with the precision of a surgeon. The clients nodded politely, but without enthusiasm. They'd heard this before, promises of efficiency and affordability that somehow always fell short when translated to reality. Then it was Jack's turn. He stood, portfolio in hand, and felt every eye in the room fix on him. The old Jack would have wilted under that scrutiny, would have deferred to someone more experienced, more credentialed. But the new Jack, the one who'd pulled a woman from a crushed car while a mountain fell, who'd said yes to impossible opportunities, who'd rebuilt his life from the ground up, the Jack met their eyes steadily. "I'm going to tell you something Thomas wouldn't," Jack began, setting aside the prepared remarks he'd rehearsed. 3 months ago, I was a construction worker barely making rent on a tiny apartment with my 7-year-old daughter. I knew what it meant to choose between heat and groceries, to tell my kid she couldn't have new shoes because the car needed repairs. I knew what it felt like to live in a place that was shelter, but not a home. The room had gone quiet. Even Thomas looked surprised by this departure from script. When Catherine asked me to work on this project, I could have designed what everyone expects. Efficient boxes that warehouse people affordably. Buildings that get the job done but don't inspire, don't uplift, don't give residents any reason to feel proud of where they live. Jack opened his portfolio and pulled out the renderings. But I remembered what I wished for in all those crappy apartments. I remembered what would have made the difference between surviving and actually living. He walked around the table, placing renderings in front of each client. Every unit has windows positioned for maximum natural light. Studies show sunlight reduces depression and improves children's academic performance. The community spaces are designed for multiple uses, playgrounds that become outdoor theaters, community rooms that transform into tutoring centers or job training spaces, rooftop gardens where families can grow vegetables, teaching kids where food comes from while reducing grocery costs. One of the clients, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, who ran a housing advocacy nonprofit, leaned forward with interest. "These look expensive. How does this fit our budget constraints?" "We maximize prefabricated components to reduce construction costs," Thomas interjected, back in his element. "The designs are modular, but don't look at, we're using sustainable materials that cost less long-term through energy efficiency." "But the real savings," Jack continued, "come from reducing turnover. Buildings designed with dignity keep families longer. Lower turnover means lower maintenance costs, less money spent finding new tenants, more stable communities. The upfront investment pays for itself." Another client spoke up, an older man named Marcus Williams from the city's housing authority. "I've heard this before, promises of dignity and community. Then we get buildings that look different on the outside, but feel the same on the inside. How is this different?" Jack thought about Emma asking him similar questions, about learning to trust good things again. "Because I'm not designing for a demographic or a budget line. I'm designing for people like I was, people who deserve more than survival, who want their kids to come home to a place that feels safe and hopeful." He pulled out another rendering. "See these varied facades? You can't tell from the outside which units are subsidized and which are market rate. No stigma, no visible division. Inside, the subsidized units have the same quality finishes, the same access to amenities. Dignity isn't a luxury feature, it's built into every decision." Sarah Rodriguez was studying the plans intently now, her finger tracing the layout of the community spaces. "These gathering areas, they're distributed throughout the building, not just in the lobby." Every floor has a small communal space, Jack explained. Somewhere kids can do homework together, where neighbors can meet without it being a formal thing. Community happens in small moments, not just big events. We're designing for those moments. Marcus Williams set down the rendering and looked at Jack with shrewd eyes. You said you were a construction worker 3 months ago. How does someone make that jump? Jack glanced at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. I pulled someone from a car crash. She happened to be the CEO of this company, and she decided to invest in my potential. Gave me a second chance at a dream I'd given up on. Catherine Sterling. Marcus's eyebrows rose. The story about the landslide rescue, that was you? It was, Catherine confirmed from her position near the window. Jack risked everything to save a stranger. Now he's using his second chance to create opportunities for others. That's the kind of integrity this project needs. The room fell silent as the clients absorbed this information. Jack could see them processing, recalibrating their expectations, perhaps wondering if this could really be different from all the disappointments that had come before. Finally, Sarah Rodriguez spoke. Can we see the unit layouts, the actual living spaces? For the next hour, Jack and Thomas walked the clients through every detail. Thomas handled the technical specifications while Jack explained the human reasoning behind each choice. Why the kitchens were designed to be the heart of the home. Why the bedrooms in subsidized units were sized to accommodate growing families. Why the building's entrance felt welcoming rather than institutional. The questions were tough, sometimes skeptical, but Jack answered with honesty born from experience. When they asked about challenges, he didn't hide behind corporate speak. When they pushed on costs, he acknowledged the constraints while defending the choices that mattered most. By noon, the clients were conferring quietly among themselves while the Sterling Industries team waited with barely concealed tension. Jack's shirt was damp with nervous sweat, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Thomas caught his eye and gave a small nod of approval, high praise from a man who rarely acknowledged anyone. Sarah Rodriguez stood, and the room fell silent. We've made a decision. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. Beside him, he felt Michael tense. This proposal is different from anything we've seen. It's ambitious, maybe even idealistic. Sarah paused, and Jack felt his hopes begin to crumble. Then she smiled. But it's exactly what this city needs, what these families deserve. Sterling Industries wins the contract. The room erupted in controlled celebration. Handshakes and congratulations, Catherine beaming with pride, Thomas looking genuinely pleased for perhaps the first time Jack had seen. But Jack felt almost numb with disbelief. They'd won. His designs, his vision of what affordable housing could be, was going to become real. Rachel hugged him fiercely. You did it! That presentation was incredible. We did it, Jack corrected, looking around at the team that had supported him, taught him, believed in him, when he barely believed in himself. Catherine appeared at his elbow, her eyes bright with emotion. Jack Morrison, architect. How does it feel? Surreal. Terrifying. Amazing. Jack laughed shakily. All of it at once. That's how the best victories feel. Catherine squeezed his arm. Your daughter is going to be so proud. Emma. Jack needed to tell Emma. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. But before he could dial, a text came through from Mrs. Chen. Emma told whole class her father is architect, who helps people. Teacher very impressed. She waits for your news. Jack smiled through the tears that were suddenly blurring his vision and called home. Emma answered on the first ring, having somehow convinced Mrs. Chen to let her stay home from school to wait for news. Dad, did you win? Please tell me you won. We won, Em. We're going to build it. All of it. Emma's scream of joy was so loud Jack had to hold the phone away from his ear. I knew it. I knew you would because you're the best architect ever, and you understand people, and Dad, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of you too, baby girl, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what family does. We believe in each other. Emma's voice softened. Mom would be proud too, if she could see you now. The words hit Jack unexpectedly. He rarely thought about Sarah anymore, had built walls around that pain. But Emma was right. Sarah would have been proud. would have seen the man Jack had become and recognized the potential she'd given up on. Maybe she would, Jack said quietly. But your opinion is the only one that matters to me. Then you should know I think you're a superhero, just like I always said. After they hung up, Jack stood in the hallway for a moment, composing himself. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see the client still talking with Catherine and Thomas, see Rachel showing them additional renderings, see the beginning of something that would change lives. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Take the afternoon off. Celebrate with Emma. You've earned it. Jack didn't argue. He gathered his things, accepted congratulations from colleagues who'd become friends, and drove home with the windows down despite the January chill, feeling the cold air sting his face and remind him this was real. Emma was waiting on the front steps of their apartment building, Mrs. Chen beside her with a knowing smile. The moment Emma saw Jack's car, she launched herself down the steps and into his arms the second he opened the door. Tell me everything, every single detail. Jack lifted her up, spinning her around the way he used to when she was smaller. How about I show you instead? The presentation boards are in my car. Want to see the buildings we're going to make? They spread the renderings across the hood of Jack's Honda, and he walked Emma through every design choice, every detail that would make these buildings homes instead of just housing. Mrs. Chen watched with tears in her eyes, seeing the transformation that had happened in these 3 months, not just in Jack's circumstances, but in his soul. These people are lucky, Mrs. Chen said. They get homes built by a man who knows what home should feel like. I learned from you, Jack replied, from watching you make our building feel like community, even when most people don't bother. Mrs. Chen waved away the compliment, but Jack saw her pleasure. You take Emma. Celebrate proper. I have dinner already in your apartment, pot roast and vegetables. Real celebration food. That evening, Jack and Emma sat on their small couch, which didn't feel quite so small anymore, and Emma pulled out the drawing she'd made for Catherine months ago. It was starting to fade, the colors less bright, but the rainbow and smiling sun were still visible. Do you remember what you wrote? Jack asked. Thank you for being brave, Emma recited. I gave it to her because she almost died and you saved her, and I wanted her to remember someone cared. You know what I learned today? That bravery isn't just about the big moments. It's about all the small choices, saying yes when you're scared, trusting when you've been hurt, believing in good things even when experience tells you not to. Emma snuggled closer. Is that why you stopped on the road that day? Because you're brave in the small ways too? Jack thought about it, about the choice that had seemed so impossible at the time. I stopped because I wanted you to see that helping people matters. I stayed because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. But saying yes to Catherine's offer, that took a different kind of courage, the kind that risks hope instead of safety. I'm glad you risked it. Emma yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up with her. Because now you get to help so many people, like we got helped. Jack carried her to bed, tucking her in with Mr. Whiskers and the stuffed dragon from the arcade. Dream about the future, Em. Dream big. What are you going to dream about? Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm already living the dream. After Emma fell asleep, Jack returned to the living room and opened his laptop. An email from Catherine was waiting. Jack, the clients were so impressed they're already talking about a second project. Thomas says you have instincts that can't be taught. Michael says you're the best apprentice he's ever mentored. I say you're proof that sometimes the best investments are in people, not portfolios. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being exactly who you are. The world is better for it. Jack read the email 3 times, each word settling into his chest like a foundation stone. He typed a reply. Thank you for seeing something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself. For turning a moment of crisis into a lifetime of opportunity. For showing Emma and me that good people still exist, that second chances are real, that doing the right thing sometimes does lead to the right outcome. I won't waste this gift. I promise. Catherine's response came immediately. You couldn't waste it if you tried. It was already yours. You just needed someone to help you unwrap it. Sleep well, Jack. Tomorrow we start building dreams into reality. Jack closed his laptop and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once felt like a prison of limitations and now felt full of possibility. Somewhere out there were families who didn't know their lives were about to change, who would move into buildings Jack designed and feel dignity they'd been denied elsewhere. Somewhere, Catherine Sterling was probably still working, driven by her second chance to make her empire mean something beyond profit margins. Somewhere, Emma was dreaming of being a veterinarian, her future secured by a trust fund that meant money would never limit her potential. And here, in a small apartment that had once felt like failure, Jack Morrison stood as living proof that one choice made in fear and courage could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. He'd stopped for a stranger, and that stranger had stopped his freefall into a future of diminishing returns. Jack looked at his hands, the scars barely visible now in the dim light. These hands had torn metal and saved a life. These hands had mixed concrete and built other people's dreams. These hands had held his daughter through tears and joy, had signed contracts that would change lives, had drawn buildings that would stand long after he was gone. The next morning, Jack woke to his alarm with a sense of purpose that had become familiar over these 3 months. Emma was already up, making breakfast with more enthusiasm than skill, and the apartment smelled like slightly burned bacon and possibility. "Big day?" she asked, sliding a plate in front of him. "Every day is a big day now." Jack took a bite of bacon that was indeed more crispy than intended. "But yeah, today we start the actual planning process, turning drawings into construction documents." "Will you build it? Like, actually build it with your hands?" "No, baby. Architects design, construction workers build, but I'll be on site making sure it's built right, making sure my vision becomes reality." Emma considered this. "So you still get to see it happen, get to make sure it's perfect." Exactly. At Sterling Industries, the atmosphere had shifted. Jack was no longer the new guy, the charity case, the construction worker playing architect. He was the architect who'd won the Wellington contract, whose designs had impressed clients used to disappointment. Colleagues greeted him with new respect, and when he walked past Catherine's office, she waved him in. "Close the door," she said, and Jack's stomach clenched with worry. But Catherine was smiling. "Relax, this is good news. The Wellington clients were so impressed they want to fast-track the project. Groundbreaking in 6 months instead of a year. Can you handle the accelerated timeline?" "With the right team, yes." "You'll have whatever resources you need. Thomas is already assembling the team. He requested you specifically as co-lead architect." Catherine leaned back in her chair. "Jack, do you understand what's happening? You've been here 3 months, and you're already leading major projects. That's not luck. That's talent finally getting the opportunity it deserves. It's your opportunity. Your belief. My opportunity was lying in a crushed car waiting to die. You gave me a second chance at life. This?" Catherine gestured to the building around them, to the world of possibility Jack now inhabited. "This is you giving yourself a second chance. I just opened the door. You walked through it." Jack thought about that metaphor, about doors and choices, and the courage to walk toward uncertainty. "Thank you for opening it. Thank you for having the strength to enter." Catherine stood and extended her hand. "Partners, Jack. In making the world a little bit better, one building at a time." Jack shook her hand, feeling the weight of partnership, of equals working toward something meaningful. Partners. The months that followed were intense but fulfilling. Jack worked alongside Thomas and a growing team to translate their designs into detailed construction documents. He spent hours with engineers and contractors, his construction background making him invaluable in identifying potential issues before they became expensive problems. He attended city planning meetings and community forums, listening to future residents describe their needs and incorporating their feedback into the designs. Emma flourished too. Her grades improved with the security of knowing her future was protected, her dreams achievable. She volunteered at a local animal shelter, already preparing for her veterinary career. And every night, she and Jack would eat dinner together, sometimes Mrs. Chen's cooking, sometimes takeout they could now afford without stress, and talk about their days. One evening in late spring, 6 months after the landslide that changed everything, Catherine invited Jack and Emma to dinner at her penthouse apartment. It was the first time Jack had seen where Catherine lived, and the luxury was almost overwhelming. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, artwork that probably cost more than Jack's annual salary, furniture that looked like museum pieces. But Catherine herself, greeting them at the door in jeans and a casual sweater, seemed more interested in Emma's chatter about baby goats at the animal shelter than in her own opulence. "They're so cute, Catherine, And one of them is sick, so I got to help the vet give it medicine, and she said I was really good at keeping it calm, and maybe I could volunteer more and learn stuff. Catherine smiled, genuine warmth lighting her face. That sounds wonderful, Emma. You're already preparing for your career. Over dinner, which Catherine had cooked herself, insisting she needed to remember how to do normal things, they talked about the Wellington project, now days away from breaking ground. The designs were finalized, the contractors hired, the financing secured. In a few days, Jack would stand on an empty lot and watch the first foundations being poured for buildings he'd designed. I've been thinking, Catherine said as they finished dessert, about legacies and what we leave behind. Building my company was about ego, about proving I could succeed in a male-dominated industry. But the Wellington project, that's about something more. That's about creating lasting good. You've done a lot of good with your company, Jack offered. I've made money and employed people. That's not nothing, but it's not enough. Catherine looked at Emma, who was absorbed in her ice cream. When you pulled me from that car, Jack, I was at a crossroads I didn't know existed. I could go back to my old life, could pretend the near-death experience was just a scary moment to forget. Or I could let it change me, let it redirect my priorities toward what actually matters. And you chose to change. We both did. Catherine's eyes met Jack's. You could have stayed in construction, could have said no to risk and possibility, but you chose to grow, to become who you were meant to be. That's the real miracle. Not that I offered you opportunity, but that you were brave enough to seize it. Emma looked up from her ice cream. That's what Dad always says. Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing anyway. Your dad is very wise, Catherine smiled, and you're very lucky to have him. I know. Emma's voice was simple, certain. He's the best. Later, standing on Catherine's balcony while Emma dozed on the couch inside, Jack and Catherine looked out over the city lights. Somewhere down there was the lot where the Wellington project would rise. Somewhere was the apartment where Jack had struggled and survived. Somewhere was the mountain road where a landslide had brought them together. Do you ever think about that day? Jack asked. About how close it came? Every day, Catherine admitted. I think about the sound of the mountain falling, about being certain I was going to die. But mostly I think about looking up and seeing you, this stranger who had no reason to stop, who risked everything for someone he didn't know. That moment restored my faith in humanity, Jack, in goodness, in the possibility that people can still choose compassion over self-preservation. I almost didn't stop, almost drove away. But you didn't. That's what matters. Catherine turned to face him. I've been meaning to ask you something. The construction workers you used to work with, the ones struggling like you were, what would help them most? Jack thought about Danny, about Marco, about all the men who'd given up on dreams because survival took everything they had. Education, access to training, to degrees they can't afford. Second chances like you gave me. Then let's create them. Catherine's eyes were bright with purpose. A foundation. The Morrison Foundation, if you'll let me name it after you. Scholarships for working people trying to change careers, to pursue dreams they've had to defer. We'll fund education, provide mentorship, create pathways from survival to success. Jack felt tears sting his eyes. Catherine, that's incredible. But why name it after me? Because you're the embodiment of what it represents. Second chances. Potential realized. Dreams deferred but not destroyed. Catherine smiled. Plus, Emma suggested it. Said her dad should have something named after him because he's a hero. She said that? Last week when she called to invite me to her school career day. She wants me to talk about being a CEO, and she wants you to talk about being an architect. She's very proud of both of us. Jack looked through the glass doors at Emma, curled up on a couch that probably cost more than his car, sleeping peacefully because she knew she was safe, loved, secured in a future full of possibility. This was what he'd fought for. This was why he'd stopped on that rain-soaked road. The day of the Wellington project groundbreaking arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and gentle warmth that felt like blessing. Jack stood on the empty lot in a hard hat and his best suit, surrounded by city officials, future residents, and the team that had made this possible. Emma stood beside him, wearing her own child-sized hard hat that Catherine had specially ordered. Sarah Rodriguez from the Housing Coalition spoke first, talking about years of advocating for dignified, affordable housing, for buildings that treated residents as valued community members rather than problems to be warehoused. Then Catherine spoke about Sterling Industries' commitment to social responsibility, to using their resources for genuine good. Then it was Jack's turn. He looked out at the crowd, at faces worn by struggle, at city officials used to compromising dreams, at his colleagues who'd helped him grow, at Catherine, who'd believed in him, at Emma, who'd never stopped believing, and he spoke from the heart. 6 months ago, I was a construction worker who'd given up on being an architect. I'd accepted that dreams were luxuries I couldn't afford, that survival was enough of a goal. Then something happened that changed everything. I made a choice to help someone, and that choice opened doors I thought were permanently closed. Jack paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. These buildings we're about to construct represent more than affordable housing. They represent dignity. They represent the belief that everyone deserves to live in a place that feels like home, not just shelter. They represent second chances. He gestured to the empty lot. In a year, families will move into these buildings. Kids will do homework in the community rooms. Neighbors will meet in the rooftop gardens. And maybe, just maybe, someone struggling like I was will look at these buildings and see possibility instead of limitation, see hope instead of just survival. Emma tugged his sleeve, and Jack bent down. "Tell them the truth, Dad," she whispered. "Tell them what you told me." Jack straightened and looked at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. "The truth is, I designed these buildings for myself, for the person I was 6 months ago, struggling to give my daughter a decent life. Every choice, the natural light, the community spaces, the dignity and design, comes from remembering what I wished for in all those years of just getting by. If these buildings can give other families what I wished for, then they'll be exactly what they're meant to be." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jack saw tears on Sarah Rodriguez's face, saw Marcus Williams nodding approval, saw Catherine beaming with pride. But the face he focused on was Emma's, glowing with joy and certainty that her father was exactly the hero she'd always believed him to be. They broke ground together, Jack, Catherine, Sarah, Marcus, and Emma, each shoveling symbolic dirt while cameras flashed and the future took its first tangible form. The earth turned easily, ready to receive the foundations that would support buildings designed with love and understanding, built on the principle that everyone deserves dignity. That night, after the ceremonies and celebrations, after Emma was asleep clutching her miniature hard hat, Jack sat at his kitchen table with his notebook. He sketched not buildings this time, but the journey, a rough timeline from the rain-soaked road to this moment of groundbreaking. Every choice, every fear overcome, every small victory that led to this larger triumph. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Thank you, Jack, for everything, for saving my life, for showing me what matters, for designing buildings that will change lives. The Morrison Foundation launches next month. Your legacy is already growing." Jack typed back, "Thank you for seeing potential. I'd stopped seeing in myself, for turning a moment of crisis into a lifetime of meaning, for being the kind of person who gives second chances because she understands their value." Catherine's response came quickly. "We saved each other, Jack. That day on the mountain, we both got second chances. The difference is, we had the courage to take them." Jack set down his phone and looked around his small apartment. They'd been talking about moving, about finding something bigger now that they could afford it. But Jack wasn't ready yet. This place, with its thin walls and leaky ceiling, represented where they'd come from. It was a reminder that dignity wasn't about square footage or fancy fixtures. It was about love and purpose, and the courage to keep going when everything felt impossible. Maybe they'd move eventually. Maybe they'd find a bigger place, something that fit their new life. But for now, this apartment was perfect because it held every struggle that had led to every triumph, every fear that had been overcome, every dream that had refused to die. Jack walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. Tomorrow she'd go to school and tell everyone about the groundbreaking, about helping build buildings that would help people. Tomorrow, Jack would return to his desk at Sterling Industries and continue refining designs that would become homes. Tomorrow, Mrs. Chen would probably make dumplings and share wisdom disguised as casual conversation. But tonight, in the quiet dark of an apartment that had witnessed transformation, Jack Morrison allowed himself to feel the full weight of gratitude. For the choice he'd made on a rain-soaked road. For the courage to say yes when fear screamed no. For the daughter who'd believed in rainbows and smiling suns even when reality suggested otherwise. For the woman who'd turned a debt of gratitude into an investment in human potential. The scars on Jack's hands caught the moonlight filtering through the window, permanent reminders of the day everything changed. He traced them gently, these marks of courage and consequence, and smiled. Some scars represented trauma, loss, pain to be forgotten. But these scars were different. These scars were proof that sometimes, when you reach out to save someone else, you end up saving yourself too. Jack returned to the living room and opened his laptop one final time. An email from Thomas Wellington was waiting. Morrison, your instincts on the Wellington project were impeccable. I've recommended you for promotion to senior architect. You've earned it. Welcome to the top tier. Jack read the email twice, letting the words sink in. Senior architect. 3 months ago, he'd been mixing concrete. 6 months ago, he'd been a construction worker with abandoned dreams. And now he was being promoted to the top tier of a profession he'd thought was lost to him forever. He didn't reply to Thomas's email. Instead, he opened a new message to the construction crew he used to work with, the men who were still struggling like he'd been. The email was simple. The Morrison Foundation is launching next month. Scholarships for working people who want to change careers, pursue deferred dreams. Applications open soon. If you've got a dream you gave up on, maybe it's time to pick it back up. Second chances are real. I'm living proof. Jack hit send and closed his laptop, feeling the circle complete itself. He'd been given a second chance, and now he could help others find theirs. The ripple effect of one choice, one moment of courage, spreading outward in ways impossible to measure. He pulled out the business card Catherine had given him that first day in the hospital, the one with her private number, now worn from being carried in his wallet like a talisman. On the back, in Emma's careful printing, were the words she'd written, "Thank you for being brave." Jack had given that message to Catherine, but maybe it had been meant for him too. Thank you for being brave enough to stop, brave enough to risk everything, brave enough to believe in second chances even when experience suggested they didn't exist. The city lights glittered beyond his window, each one representing a life, a story, a journey like his own. Somewhere out there, someone was making a choice that would change everything. Somewhere, courage was overcoming fear. Somewhere, second chances were being born from moments of crisis. And here, in a small apartment that had witnessed transformation, Jack Morrison, former construction worker, current architect, forever father, finally understood what Catherine had meant that day in the hospital. She'd said, "You saved me. Now let me help you." But the truth was simpler and more profound. They'd saved each other. In that moment on the rain-soaked road when the mountain was falling and choices had to be made, they'd both been given the gift of second chances, the gift of becoming who they were meant to be. Jack looked one more time at Emma, sleeping peacefully in the next room, then at the city stretching endlessly beyond his window. Tomorrow the Wellington project would move forward. Tomorrow the Morrison Foundation would take shape. Tomorrow new dreams would be built on foundations of courage and compassion. But tonight, Jack Morrison simply felt grateful for the landslide that brought them together, for the courage to say yes, for the daughter who believed in heroes, for the woman who understood that the best investments are always in people, not portfolios, for second chances and the wisdom to seize them with both hands, even when those hands are scarred and trembling with fear. Because in the end, that's what changes everything, not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. Not the promise that everything will work out, but the faith to try anyway. Jack had stopped for a stranger on a rain-soaked road, and in saving her, had saved himself. Now, through buildings and foundations and opportunities given to others, that salvation would ripple outward, touching lives he'd never meet, changing futures he'd never see. And that, Jack thought as he finally turned off the lights and settled onto his pull-out couch, was the truest definition of legacy. Not what you accumulate, but what you give. Not what you achieve alone, but what you make possible for others. The scars on his hands had healed, but the marks remained. Proof that courage leaves evidence, that choices matter, that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Jack closed his eyes and smiled, feeling Emma safe in the next room, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, secure in the knowledge that he'd found his purpose, not despite the struggle, but because of it. In the darkness, he whispered the words that had become his mantra, his truth, his promise. Second chances are real. I'm living proof. And somewhere in the city, in a penthouse overlooking the lights, Catherine Sterling likely whispered the same words, both of them living testaments to the power of courage, compassion, and the miraculous possibility of transformation. The mountain had fallen, but from its wreckage, 2 lives had been rebuilt, stronger and truer than before. And the buildings they would create together would stand as monuments not to their success, but to their shared understanding that everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and the courage to dream. That was the real breakthrough. That was what changed everything. Not the rescue itself, but what they chose to do with the second chances it provided.